Good evening, guys. Welcome out to Revolution. We're going to look at Mark Ward's video, Korean King James Version Onlyism, and the story of Joseph Joe. Now, one of the reasons why I'm looking at this video is because there are so many things that some people just take for granted when they think about the King James Bible. What we can see Mark Ward is doing is he is trying to make it a normal type of Christian endeavor to demonize those who use the Textus Receptus in the King James Version. And so this is absolutely bizarre behavior, because all the way through the Reformation period, they used the Textus Receptus and they use Bible versions, which were pretty much like the King James Version in multiple languages. And when the Bible societies were started, they used those Bibles as well for 100 years. And so basically Mark Ward is saying the Bibles that we've had for approximately 400 to 500 years have been wrong. And we need to go with these new Bibles, or else we're in a cult. And oftentimes these people are dangerous because they've got these old Bibles. It's so strange. And so anyway, we're going to look at a few things. And so I've gone through this video. I went through it once, maybe about a week ago, and I've just been going through pieces of it again. And I just went through about 15 minutes of it earlier. Once again. And so, there's just tiny little crumbs of information that these guys say that show us that, the whole concept of being charitable and, looking at other people and saying, well, they're Christians and they've got the right to, have whatever Bible they want. All of that it's passive aggressive. These guys are very aggressive towards anyone who holds the King James position, the Textus Receptus position. Mark Ward just outright calls them Ruckmanites if you think the Bible has no errors. And he's pretty much he's very toxic when it comes to this type of generalization, because he's putting lots and lots of people into a place where they should feel shame about their position. When we look at the Textual Confidence Collective, people who have even said things about Westcott and Hort need to repent, like Timothy Berg did, put their hand up at an altar call and answer that altar call and just come to Jesus and realize that, it's Jesus, not the King James and all this sort of stuff. And so anyway, but I do understand there are people out there who can hold the King James in their hand and be completely off the wall. The Mormons do that. There's lots of people who do that. Just because you hold the correct Bible in your hand doesn't mean that you are living that correct Bible. But there's a lot of things in this. And this touches right at the nerve of the Textus Receptus website that I have, and the Textus Receptus Academy and other things, because I'm often involved with doing Bible translation work into other languages. And so listening to how disappointed these guys are that there's all these King James Bibles all of a sudden in Korean, it's like, oh, okay, well, they scold people like, Peter Ruckman, D.A. Way, who's just recently passed away, Phil Stringer, many, many other people, Will Kinney. They scold those guys for saying, oh, no, we've got another NIV edition in Spanish, or we've got another NIV edition in Dutch or something like that. And they're like, oh, these King James Onlyists are just, so bombastic. They're so rude. And, that they have this toxic type of spirit. But then when you talk about all these King James Version editions in Korean, they're like, how strange, how bizarre. This is a dangerous thing. We've got to really put a lid on this. And it's like, aren't you guys doing exactly the same thing? So anyway, let's jump straight into this. Now, there is a guy on Facebook, and he probably will be watching this. So what I did, I'm going to he has put some posts on the Textus Receptus Academy. And so what I might just do, I'll just read through some of the things that he said, and I'll put the picture up of what he's put up. Okay, so that way, it's not really showing who he is, because I haven't really gotten his permission. And sometimes if you're friends on Facebook, you can see all their stuff, and they might want everyone to see it. So just going through the group posts that they've put onto the Textus Receptus Academy. I'll just open this up at a new tab. Okay. And so this person here has the Why I Preach from the Received Text. And so they've just written here, delivery to South Korea was available. I also got this book too. Korean Presbyterian ministers can preach based on Calvinism precisely, but most do not preach from the received text. This must be translated. I hope so. And so this is in August 2022. So this would have just come out. He's obviously got the Defined King James Bible by the D.A. Waite and his son. And you've got a King James edition here. And so this person is obviously very interested in the King James issues there. And I'll just go to another picture, because I felt that this really needed to be shown. I just stumbled across this actually. And this is a really good diagram about the King James editions. And so I'll just throw this one up there. So here we have Dr. Jung's Korean King James Version, 2000 to 2021. In Christ Publications, keepbible.com, Charity Baptist Church, Ikkeon, Korea, Dr. Dongso Jung, 1959 to present. The main translator is Dr. Dongso Jung, and helpers from abroad are D.A. Waite, Dr. Robert P. Kendall. Proven translators, Pastor Yong Goin Kim, Pastor Jack Kim, and Dr. Han Tak. So this is Dr. Jung's Korean King James Version. So this seems like the one that the DA, the Waites have had involvement with. And so designed by Daniel Bang. The first edition printed in 2000. So this is Korean English parallel column. And so these are some of the editions. 400th anniversary edition printed in 2011. The Majesty edition. And so, these guys have a lot of that type of information there. So then there is, I'll just open this other one. Open in new tab. And we can see this one. So this is Dr. Song Lee's Korean King James Version, 1994 to 2019. The Word of God Preservation Society, Bible Baptist Church, Gimpo, Korea, Dr. Song Lee. So from 1939 to 2022. So it's the Oxford King James Old Testament. So the previous one was the Pure Cambridge edition. So this is the Oxford King James, Dr. Song Lee's Korean King James. So the Korean New Bible, New Testament translation from the Textus Receptus Greek English Interlinear translation, the 1990s, a Cambridge 1762 King James for correction of 2019 edition. And then it has an asterisk here. I translated the New Testament Greek Textus Receptus, literally comparing the King James Version and adjusted the terms. The preface to Song Lee's translation. So here's a link, biblemaster.co.kr. So this is the Ruckman Reference Bible in Korean. First edition was printed in 2012, later updated in April 2019. So it looks like they've got a whole bunch of Bibles there that you can get with the Ruckman editions and things like that. And so I'll just check and see if there's any other pictures there, because no, they're the only two. Now what I'll do is I'll just read the little thing that came with it. It's quite long. A brief history of the Korean Textus Receptus King James Version translation, updated in 7.28. So 28th of the 7th, I guess. So this is in 2022. Okay. So when the missionary John Ross translated the Bible into the Korean language in 1884, he used the Westcott and Hort critical text for translating the New Testament. Thus, Korean churches started with a critical text-based Bible. So that's pretty rare. Most countries actually had a Textus Receptus-based Bible by the Bible societies, and then they went on to dump those for critical text ones. Say the Urdu translation, for example, the 1880 Hindustani edition is Textus Receptus-based, and so that's what we've been basing ours upon. Through several editions, most Korean churches have been using the Korean Revised Version and New Korean Revised Version, and a few Korean Bible believers are using the KJV-based translation. The Word of God Preservation Society, Dr. Song Lee, 1939 to 2022, was a leader of the Word of God Preservation Society and a pastor of the Bible Baptist Church in Gimpo, Korea. After he was saved in 1978, the 23rd of the 7th month, and studied theology, he realized that TR-based Korean translation is necessary. He individually translated Textus Receptus interlinear English translation, English literal translation under Greek Textus Receptus of interlinear Greek New Testament into Korean, and called it New Bible New Testament in the early 1990s. So this sounds like the J. Green interlinear Bible. In 1991, Dr. Song met Peter Ruckman and had a deep fellowship with him. He followed Ruckmanism, including double inspiration, and his attitude. So this attitude became a negative trigger in Korean Presbyterian churches. After meeting Ruckman, he firstly published Korean King James Version in 1994 with his fellow translators. Though he included King James Old Testament and New Testament based on Textus Receptus interlinear English translation, he titled it Korean King James Version. This was the start point to spread Textus Receptus-based Korean translation in South Korea. Until his death, his Korean King James Version was revised and corrected many times. Though Baptist believers disagree with Calvinism, insulting Calvinism with rudeness is not proper. However, Dr. Song Lee strongly criticized Calvinism, and he regarded the Korean Revised Version as a satanic Bible because of his rude attitude, which comes from Dr. Ruckman. The General Assembly of Presbyterian Church in Korea and Presbyterian Church of Korea hereticated Dr. Song Lee and Word of God Preservation Society in the late 1990s. The former assembly hereticated him in 1998. So it seems like he was saying stuff, like that Ruckman would say, or that pretty much, IFB guys would say about Calvinism, and so I'm not a Calvinist, I'm not Reformed, and so I'm just letting you guys know that from the get-go. So I'm just reading this as just, history. Dr. Song Lee certainly played his role as a pioneer, but due to his self-righteous nature, the translators who were with him left him, and a few years later they joined Pastor Jung and translated another Korean King James Bible. In Christ Jesus Publications / Keep Bible, Dr. Jung Dong-so is a pastor of Charity Baptist Church, Ikon, Korea, and an administrator of Keep Bible website. He is the main translator of the Korean King James Version. He learned the fundamental doctrines of Christianity in the US and had an interest in the King James Version. Later, Dr. Jung had a close relationship with Dr. Waite, and Dr. Waite sent him to Korea. And so he's got a link there for Bible for Today missionaries. Dr. Jung started translating the King James Version into Korean in 1992. When he was in the process of translation, Pastor Jack Kim, one of the Korean King James Version translators, contacted him for the accurate translation of the Korean King James Version. So some pastors who set themselves apart from the Word of God Preservation Society and other IFB pastors helped Dr. Jung to translate it accurately. The first edition was printed in 2000. 11 years later, the 400th anniversary edition of the Korean King James Version, 5th edition, was sold by many Korean Christians. The logo Spiritus Gladius was used for this edition. However, Dr. Jung's translation was corrected again for improving grammar and readability. So the recent edition was printed in 2021, which title is called Majesty Edition, 6th edition. Sadly, in 2016, Dongwoo Kwon, a Korean Bob Jones student in the past, criticized Dr. Jung that he is a King James Version onlyist. Dr. Jung states that he is a King James Version onlyist, but does not follow Ruckman. He's not a Ruckmanite. Kwon's work was like the low rank of Mark Ward. He criticized Dr. Jung for about 4 to 5 years. To this effect, the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in Korea stated that Dr. Jung's bibliology aspect is dangerous, and he does not follow Korean Presbyterian Church tradition because most Korean churches are Presbyterian. This could happen. Through many trials, though many trials passed him, Korean IFB churches are still using Dr. Jung's Korean King James Version. I also have used and read this translation. So this is the guy on Facebook using his material. So then it's got a heading, difference between each translator. The main problem of Dr. Song Lee was his contradictory attitude. He kept in contact with Dr. Ruckman, but he did not follow that King James Version is the final authority. The Word of God Preservation Society has translated many books written by Ruckman. In fact, he defended Ruckman for getting commercial gains by translating Ruckman's books. Because Dr. Song Lee studied New Testament Greek at first, he could not give up his New Testament translation from Textus Receptus English Interlinear Bible. Therefore, he could not state that the English King James Version is his final authority, and he emphasized that his translation, Dr. Song Lee's Korean King James Version, is the final authority, more than English King James Version. His society still teaches this wrong confession. Finally, his wrong perspective brought division. However, Dr. Jung and proven translators commonly agree that the King James Version is the final authority for Bible believers. They directly translated the King James Version into Korean without any impurities. Moreover, various experts helped for improving translation and readability. In many ways, their coherent path gives credibility to Dr. Jung's translation. I recommend Dr. Jung's translation because it was not biased by Ruckmanism, and reliable Bible believers helped for accurate translation, and it has been widely spread. So that's the blurb that goes along with these images here. And so what I might do is grab there were a couple of links here. Actually, we're seeing these links here, biblemaster.co. I'll just go there. biblemaster.co.kr. Let's see if that one is still up. Okay, so that one's down. There was the one behind that, which is keepbible.com. So let's check that one out. Keepbible.com. And oh no, it's coming up. There we go. So I'll just drop these ones down here. Getting a few comments. I'll just check them. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so this is the Korean Bible Bible one, and so this is the one that is the Keep Bible one. Seems to be the one that was done by D.A. Waite and is recommended by this guy. The Dr. Jung's Korean King James Version. So the Dr. Song Lee's seems to be the Ruckmanite version, which was a good starter edition, but then Dr. Jung seems to have tidied it all up and done his own edition. And so obviously this is all in Korean, but it does look like they have quite a lot of material to do with the King James Bible. Since 2007, they've had lots of people look on the website. And let's see if we can translate this into English. Okay, so we've got a little pop-up there. King James Bible, very interesting Bible study, Life of Godliness Community Reference Room. They've got a video series. Okay, lots and lots of stuff on here. So maybe I'll open just one up. So it says King James Bible. Let's go to English. King James Bible Unitarianism, King James only definition, cloud, etc. This was posted around 2016. Okay, so they're explaining the difference between good King James onlyism and bad King James onlyism. And so they've got videos here. Or King James only Unitarianism. That's how it gets translated as. So that would be onlyism. That's quite amazing how it translated to Unitarianism. Movies like A Lamp in the Dark, The Book That Changed the World, 400th anniversary, Apocrypha, marginal notes. So we might just jump on that one and have a quick look. Go to English. Okay. And so we can see here, let's crack it open in YouTube.
네, 이번 시간에는
Okay, so it looks like it's all going to be in Korean. There's a lot of books on his desk there. We'll check some of them out.
이 연대기를 이제 가끔 보시면
Okay, Battle for the Bible, and then a whole bunch of other books. Holy Bible there, New Age versions, which version is the Bible, etc. So, yeah, he's obviously going through and checking these things out, and looking at all these things. And so, yeah, so this site looks like it's pretty in-depth. pretty active, up to date, and it looks like these guys are the ones who sort of won out with the King James battle, and have a lot of articles, a lot of videos and things like that. I might look at some of these other ones, because sometimes it's very interesting to see what people have on their website. Are all Bibles the same? Okay, so this is very helpful, showing where there's differences in English Bibles. And so this is obviously in Korean. So let's go to Korean. And it's showing you exactly where the King James Version differs from, say, the NIV and New American Standard Version, showing where there's deleted verses and all that sort of thing. So very good. I would be in agreement with all that. New King James Bible analysis. What's the Septuagint? So yeah, very interesting. Okay, so I'll just shut those down, but I just thought I'd let you know that that's in the background there. And we also have a lot of these. I'll just check these and just see if they're. Yeah, it's sort of going through the autograph through to the Textus Receptus editions and TR editions. So I won't show that. But I'll show you another picture that he has put on the TR Academy. Oh yeah, it's actually a video. That's cool. And it might just be in all Korean, but it looks like there's just a box of the Holy Bible. I can't read any of that, but it has King James Version down the bottom there. So I'll just pull the sound back a bit. Let's have a look.
안녕하세요.
So yeah, it's interesting. You can usually tell where people are at by looking at their bookshelf, but sometimes, people have, obviously that's a replica book. People have those type of things because they're examining them and going through certain claims. It doesn't mean that they're following those things, but yeah, so obviously he does a bit of a speech about these Bibles. I might just show the last little bit there. So they look like the Majesty ones that we saw. The Majesty ones. Sorry, it's jumping in and out there. When I play these videos, they take up a lot of bandwidth. So yeah, it looks like they're selling, packaging CDs, keyword study Bible. So encouraging people to do word studies and things like that for themselves. Okay, so they're putting the CD into the actual Bible there, which is pretty cool. Okay, shut that one down. I'll just see if there's any more on this Facebook here. No, that's about it. But I'll just read this. So that was the Korean King James Bible 6th edition or Majesty edition. Pastor Dong So Young and fundamentalist Baptist ministers began translating King James Bible to Korean in 1992. Then several Korean mild Ruckmanites and other experts joined that same ministry after 1996-97. So the first Korean edition of Pastor Jung's translation was published in 2000. D.A. Waite and Robert P. Kendall gave great help to render the proper translation. Pastor Jung mainly considered 2 points for translating the Korean King James Bible. The first point was to translate accurately, and the second point was to deliver the linguistic expression plainly. Based on these two principles and rules of translation only translators know, Korean King James Bible 6th edition will be published on July the 15th. So this is in 2021. This notice is a great joy for Bible believers because Pastor Jung's translation has been spread extensively in Korea. The 6th edition will be done. So these guys are very excited about this happening. And so I'll just check and see if there's anything else that needs to be said about that. No, I think that's it for that brother sharing information on the Textus Receptus Academy. And so I'll just shut down those pages as I've got so many pages open. So just bear with me for a second. Shut that one down, that one down, that one down, and those ones down. And we're left with 3 pages open. That's good. Okay, so let's just get straight into Mark Ward's video.
I don't know when you all are viewing this out in YouTube land, but it just so happens that the last person I interviewed just a couple days ago, as I record, was in Cary, North Carolina. His name is Peter Gaiman. We had a great talk about 2 passages in the Old Testament. I'm actually having another conversation with a friend in Cary, North Carolina, and God's providence. He happens to live there as well. I've known Joseph Joe now for, 10 plus years. I ran into him at my church in Greenville, South Carolina. He had actually come from Crown College, and I was very interested in this because at that time, too, I had interest in the King James Only controversy. And Joseph, as you might have perceived, has a different ethnicity than mine and does come from South Korea. He became a Christian there, and will tell some of his story. But we're actually going to talk about King James Onlyism in South Korea. A couple of interviews ago, I talked to Reiner de Boyce, who's Dutch, and the title of that video was "quote-unquote" KJV-Onlyism in the Netherlands, because they actually have. It's not KJV-Onlyism, it's its own, TR variety, a Dutch translation that they protect there. But this title doesn't have those quotation marks because it's full-blown King James Onlyism with its own Korean twist in South Korea. And I want to talk to Joseph about that. First, however, I want to ask Joseph how you serve the body of Christ. Tell us some of the roles in which you're serving, and certainly tell us about the education that you're still undergoing.
Yes, Mark, thank you for having me here at your YouTube channel. And I am Joseph Joe. My Korean name is Young-Hui, Jo Young-Hui. And I am an assistant pastor at College Park Baptist Church in North Carolina. And within the same church, I started the Korean church plant about 2 years ago. So it was 2021. And we are having about 9 families, Korean families, meeting regularly every Sunday. And we are hoping to charter this church by this September of 2024.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. And then I am a PhD student in biblical studies with New Testament emphasis at Southeastern Seminary under Dr. Charles Course, who's a great Nephian scholar.
Yeah, fantastic. And he's written on textual criticism and on canon, as I recall. It sounds to me like you probably don't have a lot of time for watching TV. Is that true?
I try not to.
Good.
I try not to watch TV anymore.
Good. Yeah, please. You need to get these things done. I know the stress of having full-time work. That was, for me, ministry, but not pastoral ministry, and going to school. That's very difficult. Joseph, I pray for success for you. You got to come to the Bible Faculty Summit that I lead a couple years ago, and I hope to see you there again. I've seen your gifting, And I really remember what I think has to be the first time I talked to you. Maybe not. I mean, I just remember talking to you at Mount Calvary and being very curious about your story, having come from Crown College. Like I said in the intro, we'll get some of that. Let me just mention one other thing. And you're serving with Matt Walker, who's also a friend, and I feel bad. He invited me to come speak at a bibliology conference he did a couple years ago, and I had to turn him down. I am literally on the edge of the country. You cannot see it, but right out this window is Bellingham Bay, and I have found it is just really hard for me to go all the way to the East Coast and back. So I hope this makes up for a little bit. Let me just start with this, Joseph. I believe you are the person who told me that there's King James Onlyism in South Korea. And as I recall, at that time, 10 years ago, you said something like 5 translations of the King James into Korean. What in the world is going on? Why is there King James Onlyism in South Korea?
Yeah, to update you on that, another translation came up.
There's been a 20% increase since we last talked about it.
Yeah, and I probably there's two more talked.
Oh my, a 40% increase? Oh my goodness.
Yes, but the majority. I mean, there are 6 or 7 now. I don't even know how many exactly because so many small groups of people who dearly love the King James Version. They want to translate them in their own versions. So there is a divisive nature of the King James Onlyism there. But
so it's a divisive thing if King James people are wanting to translate that. They just say there are Textus Receptus editions. Obviously, it seems like the Ruckmanite guy was translating from the TR, and then he was amending it and getting back to some King James Bible readings, because the Textus Receptus edition was probably J. Green's, which is the big interlinear one that I've got on the shelf there. This one here, you'll recognize it. So this one here, but he has quite a lot of definitions in that are not quite kosher, and so obviously there are places in there that would have needed amending, regardless of your position, and that was done in like 1976. Even his edition that he did himself of the where is it? This one here, Interlinear Greek New Testament Interlinear by J. Green. This is way more updated and a lot better. And he eventually did the modern King James Version and another one, I can't remember the name of it. And so he was constantly working on that text. And so if someone went to the earliest text that they had, that I used to, when I first became a Christian, I used to photocopy pages of that and put and fold them over and put them in my pocket, so I could go to work and look at the Greek, look at the Hebrew, and sometimes the definitions were just really bad. And so it's a bit like sometimes like a Young's literal translation, but it would have been a good starter Bible, and by the looks of it, that's what it was. It was a good starter Bible, but apparently if you have 4 or 5 or more King James editions in that language, it's a bad thing and it's divisive. But if you have hundreds of versions in English, the ESV, the NIV, the NLT, you name the acronym, well, that's fine. That's an embarrassment of riches, according to Mark Ward. And so you see this double standard where I'm sure that there would be NIVs, ESVs, NASBs, a whole bunch of other Bible translations in their language, but they're only focused on the King James ones that are causing division. See, the issue is how different are these King James ones and all the rest of it. And I guess some people do label things as King James, but they can have readings that are not really King James. And so we've seen this. People have brought these out. Or even my interview with Phil Stringer, he said, people have just got to be careful about these King James Bibles being printed out there, because sometimes the people who are doing the translation of it they're going. I think he said in the Philippines they were going with the Moffat's translation and calling it the King James Bible, and so we see this type of thing happening.
So 1990s it started. The people who were educated in the United States under the pastors who believe in the King James Onlyism, and of course Peter Ruckman and D.A. Waite. These are the two big names who represent the American King James Onlyism. So we do have two.
And so what you see there is over the years, people have just conflated Ruckman and D.A. Waite when these guys were very clearly stating their positions. D.A. Waite was saying, I have nothing to do with Peter Ruckman. Please stop saying that I have anything to do with him. James White, in his book, The King James Only Controversy, basically was just calling D.A. Waite a King James Onlyist. And D.A. Waite was like, look, if you want to say that about my English Bible reading, that's fine. But if you want to put me into the Ruckmanite crowd, it's wrong, because I go to the Textus Receptus, I go to the Masoretic text, the Aramaic, and I'm looking at the original languages. And I'm saying that the underlying text is akin to the originals. And so there was this distinct difference between the Dean Burgon Society crowd and the Ruckmanites. And but what happened was, when James White wrote his book, The King James Only Controversy, he had 5 different categories for King James Onlyists. And one of the categories actually mentions Zane Hodges, who's a majority text guy. So pretty much it was like, if you just had another opinion than the critical text opinion, you're a King James Onlyist, sort of thing. And yeah, it's quite poorly done when you look at the definitions that James White gives, and just sort of labels all these people. If you're King James, your grandma's likes reading the King James and she's King James preferred, well, she's a King James Onlyist, and it just sort of threw a whole bunch of people into this King James only camp. And then it was guilt by association. Well, there's some people in there who are weirdos. So you don't want to be a weirdo, do you? You don't want to have to wear the T-shirt that we just gave you. So here's the King James only T-shirt. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess I do read it. And it's like, and on the back, it's got the Ruckman logo and the Ripplinger logo and the GIP logo. And it's like, you have to wear them. And it's like, well, I don't want to wear them. It's like, well, the only way around that is get an NIV, or, take that whole T-shirt off completely. And so this narrative is obviously, leaked out into the world, and this is quite a popular type of narrative. And so obviously this guy is sort of saying that D.A. Waite and Ruckman, these are King James Onlyists, that pretty much just, the same type of thing. But we'll go through, and he does mention that there is a nuance here, but let's just continue.
Kinds of King James only people in South Korea. So there's one from Ruckman influence. His name is Song-O Lee. He's deceased, I think, now. But he's translated the King James Version into Korean and called it Korean King James Version. But he claimed that he translated from Greek and Hebrew. But we do know that he wasn't really trained in those fields. So I don't know. He claimed it, so I just take it at his word. But we doubt he really translated from the original languages. And so that group, it has been quite controversial from the get-go. So they were actually condemned. That group was condemned by the Korean Protestant denominations like Presbyterians. We have different...
So it'd be interesting to see, because it does seem like the Presbyterians condemned it because of his anti-Calvinism stance. It would be interesting to see if other groups condemned it who are also anti-Calvinists, or if they just said, well, it's just he's just got a different Bible than us.
Sects, not sects. Different
denominations.
denomination within the Presbyterian group.
Oh, like different groups
so,
within Presbyterianism.
Yeah, so it's not really sects, but it's sort of
Sure.
divisions within the Presbyterian denomination. So like a PCUSA, and then
Right.
there's a OPC, something like that.
So more liberal,
so-
more conservative. And am I right to
Yeah,
say that Presbyterianism is the predominant form of Protestantism
Yes.
in Korea?
That's the largest.
Okay.
Mhm. Yes. So a few groups within the Presbyterian denominations condemned that group as heretical. And you can find a similar version on YouTube. His name is Gene Kim. If you're familiar
Yes, I am.
with
I'm very much
Steven
familiar.
Anderson and
Okay, so he's saying Gene Kim. Anyway, I'm just sort of looking at what people are saying about Gene Kim. But what I did notice is when I was going through this earlier, he does seem to think that Gene Kim is an Andersonite. He sort of says that. So let me just rewind that for a second.
if you're familiar
Yeah.
on YouTube, his name is Gene Kim. If you're familiar
Yes, I am.
with
I'm very much
Steven
familiar.
Anderson, and then you know who Gene Kim is.
Kim
And
quotes
he's
Ruckman
the
a lot.
version. Yes, so same kind of Ruckmanites. So
But yeah, Anderson is definitely not a Ruckman.
that's one group that started the movement in South Korea. But of course, the reception wasn't really good. And then at a similar time, there was another pastor called, his name is Dong-Soo Jung. So in Korean, Jung Dong-Soo. He's still a pastor in a quite large church. He started the church and it became so successful. And then he translated the English King James Version into Korean. And he also calls it Korean King James Version, but more like authorized version by the king, if you translate it literally. But he's more like a D.A. Waite type of person. And he was educated at PCC, not the PCC of Ruckman, but
Right.
the PCC of different, better independent Baptist type of church, school. And he got his master's there and was ordained by D.A. Waite, believe it or not. And he
So D.A. Waite's funeral is actually on probably as I speak now.
introduced the King James Version into the Korean people. And he's less militant than Lee group, the Ruckmanite group. He denies the double inspiration for sure, yet he believes in the perfect preservation of the King James Version. And he has translated the books of Edward Hills, Sam Gibb, Gail Ripplinger, and David Cloud, and D.A. Waite. And he distributes all those types of books to defend and promote the King James Onlyism in South Korea. What's interesting is he doesn't, believe in the double inspiration, but his practice is actually double inspiration. Because
So it does seem strange that he is linked to D.A. Waite, but he's printing Ripplinger's books, Sam Gibb's books, because usually these seem to be opposite sides of the King James spectrum. But when I saw that guy preaching, he did have Gail Ripplinger's book there. He had a few others, and so it looked like he had a few Ruckman books. So yeah, that's interesting.
there's no error in the English King James Version.
And
so this is one of the things where people just seem to be amazed if you state that the King James Version has no translational error. Okay. And the thing is, we're often, we do debates. We beg people on the other side to debate us. Like, I'll debate anyone in the world anytime on these issues. And we're debating people saying, okay, where's there an error? And people are like, well, what about where it has the king came to rule when he was, 2 years old or 20 years old or 50 years old? They've got all these places, and most of these have been answered. If you just do a short little Google search for 5 minutes, you'll get an answer. And usually it's a very accurate answer. But people keep bringing this up. And one thing is, if you go verse by verse through, say, like the New Testament, I mean, when it has in archein hologos, kai hologos, empros ton theon, kai theos, en hologos, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Okay. Where is the translational error in that verse? Most people will go, well, there's none. Okay. And so if you get the Textus Receptus and you go through the King James and look at them, and any place that you have any doubt, you search for people who've answered, like not just find the first thing and go, well, that's what King James Onlyists believe, and find some GIP article. Search, think about it. You go through D.A. Waite's material, go through Will Keating's material, go through KJVtoday.net, go through my website, ask people, jump on forums, all the rest of it. You realize that there's sophisticated answers to all these problems. And so when you go through, you realize that there is not one word that is translated falsely. It's a bit like to me, when these guys are saying it, it's a bit like, imagine I'm watching a video and people are like, yeah, John 1:1 is translated so badly. You can never translate that properly. So, okay, how would you translate it? You know what I mean? It's like, it is translated properly. And then you sort of beg them, where's there a mistranslation here? Well, and they usually go to places where, things have been answered so many times. It's just a rehashed argument over and over and over. And I've mentioned this several times that, I've had some friends who were translating for the EU, and they were translating into Luxembourgish. And I asked them, I said, so when you're translating into Luxembourgish, they're translating every EU document. So this is financial statements. This is to do with war, nuclear weapons, it's very serious things. So they're translating from the English, and everything was also translated into German. So that helped them with their translation, actually, because Luxembourgish is sort of a bit of a mix of a few languages. And they were translating everything into Luxembourgish. And I said, so when you're translating, like some people say that you can't accurately translate from one language to another. When you're translating, do you lose anything? Or are you able to get everything across? And they said, emphatically, no, we're fluent in all these languages. We're able to put it into Luxembourgish and get everything across. And this goes directly opposite. Most of these guys who claim you can never translate something properly are monolingual. They don't speak fluently several languages. And so you don't find that they're bringing things across from one language to another. They're just not doing that. They're not working in the field of translation. And so they're like, well, you can never do that, And obviously, if you go through the nuances of Greek and Hebrew, yes, there are words that have a whole vibrant life to it underneath the English words. And that's fine to look at those things. But at the end of the day, are they translated so that you get the point, so that you get those words given to you accurately? They are. And so this whole thing of you can never translate, you can never have something that's accurate. And if we say we've got something accurate, we're Ruckmanites. It's like, give me a break. We're in a cult, apparently, just because we believe that people can do their job properly. If there are these errors, if they've found these errors, surely they can just show people where they are and they can get fixed. You know what I mean? Like if I gave translators, like say, any book, a book in Russian, a book in Chinese. When you buy a product, you buy a set of headphones nowadays, and it comes with this little booklet, and you fold it out, and it ends up being huge. And it's translated into Arabic, it's translated into German, it's translated into Chinese, it's in all these languages. And if you buy something dangerous that can chop your fingers off, it's got the same list, it's saying the same thing, the same warnings. Don't put your finger in there and turn it on. Watch out for an electric shock, and they would be liable if they were saying things that you couldn't translate. You know what I mean? It's almost like just they've made this thing up. You can never translate you accurately. And then if you go against that, you're in a cult. You just because you say that the King James was done accurately with 60 of the world's greatest scholars of the day, they already had a bunch of English Bibles they could look at. They already had a whole bunch of other language Bibles they could look at. They were looking at the Hebrew and Greek. There were multiple interlinear Bibles around, Hutter's Dodecaglot, 12 language Bibles, the Plantin Polyglot had, the Latin and Greek, and many of these things were diglots, had like the Latin translation of Theodore Beza alongside his 1598 edition. And so they had just all this resource, but they just made mistakes because they're just dummies. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. The more that you study this, the more you think about it, the more you read about it, it's simply silly to say that you can't translate something properly and adequately. You can do that. There are people right now translating for the EU, talking about Ukraine, talking about France, talking about nuclear weapons, talking about the economy, the financial situation, talking about the price of gold. And they are able to get that across in their language. It's not like, they've just mistranslated it and we've lost it. We don't know what they're talking about. No, they are getting that directly across so people know exactly what they're talking about, so they're not pushing a button and bombing some other country. Or else, how would these countries function? You know what I mean? It just seems so dumb to claim that if you think that the King James has been translated accurately, you're in a cult. That's just ridiculous. So anyway, that's my 5 minutes of hate. Let's continue.
If he is not Ruckmanite and denying double inspiration, yes, that's a good step to take. We're glad for that. Mm-hmm. We want to acknowledge that.
We want to acknowledge because these guys are so culty, but even if they don't believe that, they're still in a cult because I said so, and so did Dan Wallace and James White, and other people say they're in a cult. So they're still cultists. You're a King James onlyist in a different language. It's so weird, anyway.
But if he's promoting Gail Ripplinger and Sam Gipp and someone like a David Daniels, you didn't mention him. I don't know. They
So he's making it that David Daniels is on that level. So I wouldn't put David Daniels on that level. I would say David Daniels, he is more of a weight type of guy. Now, I understand Chick Tracks. I remember as a new convert, I'd look at those and go, I wonder what the reference is. And you'd look, and it would say this magazine. And so you buy the magazine, it's by Chick as well. And it's that they're referencing themselves. and a lot of the time it was like Ruckman. And so I didn't have any idea who that guy was. But so obviously Chick Tracks had a Ruckman influence. But when you go through David Daniels stuff, you sort of pick up, you get the gist that he has been involved with the Bible societies on the critical text side and then become a Textus Receptus King James guy. And he's definitely not just a Ruckmanite, you know what I mean? But I don't know, Mark Ward seems to have a beef with him and maybe he'll start making videos about him. But anyway, let's continue.
They are, in my mind, extremists who are as extreme as Ruckman in their content and in their tone. David Cloud, not so much. He is not as extreme. I would put him in a similar category to D.A. Waite. So yes, it's nice that this guy is not as extreme as Ruckman.
So notice that they're not talking about the Catholic Bible in Korea, are they? They're not. You're not talking about, people in the critical text camp like Carlo Martini, who was in line to be a pope, Eugene Nida, who taught the Jesuits about dynamic equivalency, and they've been translating it that way. The Unitarians like George Van Smith, who worked with Westcott and Hort, and they're not going after these guys. They're going after people like saying, well, okay, D.A. Waite's okay, and David Cloud, that's fine. These other people are just, they're way over the top. I've often said this: if you had one chance for a preacher to preach to your family, and you could only choose one preacher, okay, and this is the only time they're ever going to hear the gospel, would you get Carlo Martini, George Van Smith, Bruce Metzger, just sort of name anyone on the critical text side? Would you get them to do it? Or which one would you, or you could only pick Ruckman, Gipp, Ripplinger. I won't even mention Waite or Cloud because they're very orthodox. They would preach the gospel very clearly. Who would you rather, Carlo Martini or Peter Ruckman? I think if you got Peter Ruckman, he would probably preach the gospel really well to them. So the thing is, these guys are only looking at our side, and apparently we've, by guilt by association, we've got the Ruckman t-shirt and the Ripplinger hat, and we have to be involved with them. But if they have that type of standard, why aren't they looking in their own backyard? Why aren't these guys saying, hey, yeah, we've got Mormons working on the Old Testament text. Hey, we've got heretical people. Tommy Wasserman doesn't believe in a literal hell, that it's flames and it's eternal. Tommy Wasserman, one of the main guys from the ETC blog. Are you going to expose him or not? Just leave him, because these guys are absolutely heretical. But I'm not into a lot of the stuff that Gal Ripplinger says. A lot of it's real kooky, Texe Marrs sort of stuff. Ruckman, I'm not into his racism stuff at all. But at the end of the day, they're way more orthodox than guys on the critical text side. So when Mark Ward's like, oh, I'm really worried about that, he's wringing his hands, and I really like the comment that Jeff Riddle said, like, clutching your pearls. Clutching your pearls. Oh, my God, these guys are so bad. And at the end of the day, they've opened their closet of skeletons, and it's like, oh, it's next level heresy. It's Roman Catholicism. It's Mormons. It's Unitarianism. It's culty. It's real culty. I understand you can get people who are, they can have a full gospel presentation, and like even Billy Graham was absolutely off the wall, but he used to preach the gospel, but I'm not saying I align with any of these people or defend any of these people, but I'm just pointing out there seems to be a double standard, doesn't there? Mark Ward sort of wringing his hands over these horrible King James people. It's like, oh, he's got levels, D.A. Waite's okay, and David Cloud, they're not as bad, this type of thing. I'm sure if he ever mentioned me, which he probably won't, because I often bring out lots of really good material against Mark Ward, and I don't think he wants his fans to find out, that I talk about how he works for Faith Life. Now, I'm not sure if he does anymore. He recently sort of got a bit of a promotion or something. But Faith Life have Verbum, the Roman Catholic branch, which is equivalent to Logos for the Protestants. They have Verbum for the Catholics. You can learn all about the Rosary. You can get 100 sayings of the Pope, and you got all these Catholic stuff. What about the brown scapula? You want to learn about that? You can just jump in and use their Bible software, and you can grab that brown scapula. You can buy that thing and wear it, and you can be safe. and make sure that you've got, statues of Mary and all the other stuff and idolatry. They're the ones paying his wage. And as I said, I'm not sure exactly where he is now. I think he's actually just been promoted through the ranks as some sort of editor. But why isn't he critiquing his own group? You know what I mean? Who would you rather come knocking at your door? Someone who's a Ruckmanite, or someone who's a faithful verbum buyer? Someone who's been buying all the books, the latest hot off the press stuff from Verbum, who thinks that Mary's fine and you should pray the rosary. Who would you rather? You know what I mean? These guys are just absolutely, they have absolute double standards. And so anyway, I could talk about that all day, but we'll just continue on with this topic.
But it sounds to me from what you're saying, and based on the ministries he's promoting from the States, he's not that far away. Boy, that really is so bizarre. Tell me, to make sure we can understand here, what do you think the doctrinal distinctives when it comes to the actual shape of their King James Onlyism, their Korean King James Onlyism? What's the difference in the shape or the formal doctrine between the two groups?
You mean the two groups in South Korea?
You named these two major figures, one
Yes,
more Ruckmanite,
yes.
one more DA weight, and you named double inspiration as probably one of those significant differences. Is that the only one?
That's right.
What other differences might there exist?
So because, Pastor Chung Dong-Soo, he has become so famous nowadays. He's a very popular YouTube preacher, one of the most popular. I think his church has more than 400,000 subscribers as of today. And I think last I saw 440,000 subscribers.
So we're not punching down here. It's much, much larger than my humble YouTube channel.
Yes. So he's now very popular because he was heavily involved in the conservative campaigns, rallies for the presidential election. And recently, a few years ago, we impeached our former president, and then through that he got on board with the super conservative side, like a Trump supporters in kind of people in South Korea, and then he was on the platforms, and he gained a lot of attention from people who are Christians. So people began to listen to his sermons. So he didn't really promote the King James Onlyism on that platform, but because he's so adamant about it, so now people are listening to his sermon, which is a little better, maybe better than most preachers in South Korea. But people now, because he teaches it, people begin to believe it, and that's how it's going. So this is not really really healthy thing for Korean Christianity. Right. So I just, as a Korean person who is being trained in biblical scholarship and who is also used to be in that camp, I feel obligated that I need to do something about it in the near future. But like I said, I'm so busy with pastoring two churches and doing my PhD work. Yeah, so I'm kind of pushing it. Right. Yeah. Pushing it back and until later, and then when the Lord allows me to do it, I will try to tackle it.
Well, you're doing some of it now, and this is helpful, though just sad. I just feel heartbroken to see Christ's body divided, especially when it's often people who really don't have opportunity to know better. I want to drill down here, though. Like, what's the actual case?
You're saying it's very sad, okay? Because people don't know better and all the rest of it. Okay, so what about the really poor translations into other languages by the Bible societies? Is Mark Ward going to make videos about that, or is he biting the hand that feeds? What about translations that talk about the guinea pig of God, like the Papua New Guinean translation, or the seal of God? This was a translation to the Alaskan people. The Bible societies have all these strange animals replacing the Lamb of God. But unfortunately, these are unclean animals according to the Old Testament, so it creates huge contradiction. And so anyway, he's very sad about, people getting King James Bibles. Now, I understand that there can be people who have a King James Bible and they can be as toxic as, a cult leader. And I understand that. But that's a separate issue, isn't it? It's not so much. See, what I'm realizing quite a lot is Mark Ward and others, like say people who've recently come out of King James Onlyism, oftentimes when you listen to what they've got to say, they are talking about a religious group that they were involved with who had a King James stance. And they've left that group. And unfortunately, they got burnt. And we might all just say we were all able to judge it and look at all the facts and figures. We might say, yeah, well, that person got burnt. Absolutely. They were in the right. They got burnt. They were trying to do the right thing. But when they get spat out the other side, oftentimes they're throwing things like the King James Bible in with that. And so, I guess it's like, imagine if you got involved with, say, one thing that I followed years ago was the Ron Paul thing that was happening in America. It was very interesting. 2008 election was happening, and it was like, oh, Ron Paul, he's Rand Paul's father. Now, he was a libertarian, and it was interesting what he was saying. He had the whole thing of end the Fed and the Ron Paul revolution and all that sort of stuff. And I followed that through. Now, imagine you became involved with that group, okay? But then Ron Paul was just rude to you or whatever, or spat, he kicked you out for no apparent reason, and you were totally innocent. But then when you left, you were like, yeah, we shouldn't end the Fed. You know what I mean? Or it's like, I just find that people are coming out of, say, the old IFB or the new IFB or whatever group is King James, and then they're basically putting their whole religious experience in one basket and sort of throwing everything in. Like some people are like, well, I don't believe in hell anymore since I left those groups, and because they used to always preach on hell, so I've gone the opposite and I don't believe in it anymore. And it's like, no, you've got to hang on to what the Bible says. And you still got to use your brain. You don't just go, well, I'm just going to do the opposite. Anytime you leave a religious institution, a denomination, or most of these things call themselves independent, and they're not. they're usually affiliated with someone somewhere. A group of 1,000 independent churches all just joining together under one leader. It's like, no, that sounds like a denomination to me. But once you sort of get spat out of one of those things, you've got to evaluate everything. And you can't, even if they've got distinctives, those distinctives might be correct. You can't just throw it out because it was them. Okay. It's like you don't go and work for Apple, get kicked out because you didn't fit in. You weren't one of the cool kids. And then you're just like, I hate phones. It's like, no, phones are still good. You use them every day, and smartphones are great. They're a great tool. You just got to be careful about what you've got to do is every time you get spat out of one of these religious institutions, you've got to go, okay, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly? And you've got to be completely honest with yourself. Not like you're making a point or a pastor preach this thing, and that's what I've done. I've left institutions and gone, okay, what were they good on? And sometimes it's like, well, they're really good on evangelism, but then it's like, well, actually, no, they just basically bullied people and had dangling carrots everywhere for people to do evangelism. Most people weren't doing it off their own bat, like because they really had a passion for the lost or anything like that. It was like, no, if you want to play in the church band, you have to be on outreach, sort of thing. And so you're running around doing all this stuff so you can be in the band, you know what I mean? And so, which is disingenuous. And to write those things down, is evangelism bad? No, it's good. I wish every church evangelized. I wish everyone went out there with the right motives. But when it comes down to, okay, what Bible version or whatever, it's like, well, should I throw this out, or is there enough reason to leave that position, or just because that pastor who I no longer like, and have to pray that I'm not bitter against that person because they use that Bible version. I'm going to attack it, or I'm going to drop it in the bin, or whatever. So don't just become part of the religious abused community. There are so many people out there who are like, oh, well, I went to this group and I'm abused. Well, mate, everyone's going to have problems with church groups and denominations and all the rest of it. And what you really need to do is write down the good, the bad, and the ugly, and pray about it, think about it, study these things through, and don't just do rash things and say rash things, because that's what I see. Like, say with Jonathan Burris, I just see him basically just jumping on the other side and saying, hey, I'm against the King James now, and I'm for all the modern versions, just jumping in the other side because he got kicked out, Anyway, I'm sure that there is more to these stories than meets the eye, but oftentimes I just find people are, throwing out things that just you don't have to throw them out just because you're in an IFB church that, and maybe they ripped you off, took your money, whatever, or you're in a Pentecostal church and Benny Hinn slapped you really hard on the forehead and you got a bruise, and he uses the King James. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm going to use the NIV from now on, Benny. It's like, well, it's a wise person who can see his enemy or someone who's against them and go, well, yeah, they do use that, and I'm going to use it too. I don't care what people think. I want truth, just truth, So we got a bunch of people in the chat. Docky is saying hello. Alan Stewart saying good morning. Everyone's just living the dream in the chat there. Not Trumpers. Yeah, those evil conservatives. Those poor banjo-playing Koreans are breaking Mark's heart. Like, Koreans are very intelligent people. I'm sure that they've figured these things out. Now, I'm not really into this pastor being, looking at all the Ruckmanite material, the Ripplinger material, but I don't know. I'm only sort of getting one side here. Perhaps that was his past. Perhaps he did those books in the past. There is still a lot of redeemable stuff in those books, because some of it's just charts of like, this is what it says in the old Bibles, this is what it says in the new Bibles. 10 words are missing. It's pretty much just stock standard stuff. So yeah, there are redeemable things in Ripplinger, Ruckman books, but anyway, let's go through this. Alan Stewart says, I'm glad they're embracing Apocalei. I can never say that. I always sound like an idiot if I try it 2 or 3 times. Hillbillyism. I'm happy to export my culture. Yeah, get the snakes out. Start drinking some poison there, Al. Great. Now I want to learn how to play the banjo. We've got some banjo lessons happening. Arsenic for advice. He's the lord of the banjo. Maybe that's 1 Timothy 3:16. Maybe Paul brought out the banjo when he was doing that song. He brought out the deliverance banjo and just started going ding 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 ding, and just he appeared in a body. So good morning. These guys are just cracking themselves up in the chat. And Derek McClure says, as someone who has studied money central banking history for 15 plus years, I've always seen Ron Paul as a treasure. He's the DA weight of the honest money libertarian space. Yes, he has a very interesting position. One thing that, I was chatting to a guy. He was a Jewish guy who used to live with me, and he was a member of the International Monetary Fund. He was a very interesting guy to talk to. And I was talking about the gold standard thing to him, and he said, no, you're looking at Americans think that they've got everything all sorted out with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve get dictated by the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS in Switzerland. They get dictated to what their interest rates are going to be and the price of gold daily. So they have way more power than the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is just, they just do whatever the BIS is telling them. And so that was interesting. And also one thing I sort of figured out too, that I would agree with Ron Paul to this extent, where the Bretton Woods Agreement. So what happened? When the Great Depression came, you had who was it? That's terrible. I should know my American presidents. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Franklin D. Roosevelt. For some reason, the Franklin word was there, but not the Roosevelt. So Roosevelt, who sort of introduced a lot of, some people feel like he put in a lot of things that were socialist into America. But so one thing that he did, he started confiscating gold, and that's, a lot of people don't realize this, that up until the 1970s, the Americans had a lot of their gold confiscated from them to basically fill up Fort Knox. Now, a lot of people feel like Fort Knox is empty. Ron Paul sort of says that as well. There was a guy called Peter Beater. He was an interesting guy to listen to, a little bit wacky, but a bit Texe Marrs sort of thing. But he was in the 1970s and 80s, and he was basically saying that Fort Knox was full of plutonium, and if you went there, you'd get plutonium poisoning, which was interesting. But a lot of people think that gold's gone now. But the main thing is that because people were getting their gold confiscated, when the gold standard was there and you could go and get, redeem your gold, your cash, go and get your receipt, your paper money, and go and actually get gold. Well, that started dying out, and, the countries, the US, they would pay their debts in gold. But then they basically went on the fiat currency in 1972, the Bretton Woods Agreement. And so the whole concept of having a gold-backed currency changed, but they also changed the rules. And so you no longer would have your gold confiscated. Okay. So you could get that piece of paper and go and actually buy gold with it and stockpile it yourself. And so that in itself is a reverse gold standard, because if you can get that piece of paper and go and buy $1,000 worth of gold and put it in your cupboard, well, that backs up the currency. So a friend of mine was telling me that there still is a gold standard, but it's just basically like a reverse gold standard. And I was like, it sort of blew me away when I first heard it, but I've been thinking about it and how a lot of currencies, fiat currencies, are valued, and usually it's by the commodities that they can buy. So anyway, I'm sort of diverting here, so I better keep to the topic. But History Documents says, I'd rather hang out in the outback with my King James Bible than with Mark Ward and his critical text Vatican-loving friends. Yeah, well, it seems like if you want to be part of faith life, bring your rosary, Lexham Press, Verbum, bring your scapulars, bring your little statues of Mary, and you'll be fine, So Derek said the BIS is the central bank of central banks. Yes. And it's interesting because, that there's all these, conspiracies, and the new IFB love this sort of stuff. But, the these guys are mostly Jewish bankers. And it's like, look, because I've lived in a Muslim country for a year, lived in Pakistan, and there are a lot of, anti-Jewish conspiracies and things like that. And it's like, yeah, I can see that. You can see some of these guys are very prominent, even here in Australia, a lot of people involved with the banking system. Swiss banks, these guys, they're all of a certain ethnicity, and it's like, okay, but I'm not saying that's good, bad, or ugly. I'm just pointing out that some people, if they want the conspiracy theory to be true, they don't have to look far. Roosevelt. Yeah, thanks for that. Good morning, history documents. Fort Knox hasn't been audited since the 1950s. Yeah, we've got all this gold in there. Yeah, right. I mean, look, even in the UK, they allow them to go in and look at the gold, and in many other places. And, obviously they don't have what the American government give even to the military. They wouldn't be able to back that up in gold in Fort Knox. And yeah, at the end of the day, even things like COMEX, groups that keep gold in certain facilities, they know that they can issue out receipts for gold that they don't have. So they've created their own little scam. Some of these gold holding places, but like, if you know this history of the goldsmiths and all the rest of it, and they've got these, receipts for gold because they know that no one comes in and gets the gold. Well, if you buy gold as if you want it delivered to your house, by a secure van and everything, you can get stolen, you get robbed, you've lost it all, but you can keep it in their safe facility and pay them $100 a year or whatever, and they'll keep it safe. And it's like, anyway, I better move on with the video. So Gene Kim was a student of Ruckman. It'd be interesting to just do a free-for-all thing on central banking. It's been an interest of mine for quite a few years. The last 5 or 6 years, I haven't really bothered much with it. It's been interesting to watch the Pakistani economy and what they do there. So coming into this late, please don't use Ron Paul's name in vain. Not that you did, but just saying, yeah. Don't worry. Ron Paul, I've read The School Revolution and The Fair. I've read nearly all of his books. So if there's anything that you like about me and my position on politics, it's because of Ron Paul. And Michael Baddarnik, who did a constitution class, 8-hour constitution class. I went through that constitution class like maybe 10 times. Really interesting. I might just get that up. Michael Baddarnik. Constitution. Yeah, he was a libertarian. Yeah, here we go. These ones, I don't know if you remember these. These were in like 2000. So this is before 9/11. If you watch through these, you get educated in what the Constitution is, and basically how the Constitution sort of made everyone a king. Instead of having King George being a king over you, you became your own king over your property, over your car, over your house. He talks about buying things in allodial title and all this stuff. Brilliant stuff. So he actually ran for president as a libertarian as well. And so, yeah, interesting. So I just thought I'd throw that there. Very educational. I haven't looked at his stuff for, probably 15 years, but very good. Michael Badnarik. Okay. Derek says Bretton Woods was after 1945. After they removed the standard in 1971, they went to the petrodollar. 1973, the Saudis, yes, and the 14 OPEC countries basically had to sell oil in US dollars. And so that's what valued the dollar. So no longer was it gold that valued the dollar, but it was the oil in Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and other countries that valued that dollar. So, and because they were all trading in the American dollar, that's what makes the American dollar keep its value, the petrodollar recycling system, which is very interesting. Hannah says, I grew up just miles away from Fort Knox, played golf on the course right next to the vault many times. Well, you might check yourself for plutonium poisoning there. No, there was a guy called Peter Beater, and if you ever look him up, I listened to all 90 of his tapes. Interesting, but sort of, oh man, some of it is like Alien 50, Area 51 stuff. It's like, man, out there. But he was saying there's no gold there. Anyway, I digress. Yes, I'm digressing. Derek McClure, I digress as well. Back to Mark Wars and his nonsense. Cool. Americans need to watch those, and members of Congress, and maybe the president too. Yeah, very good concepts. And after watching those, I'm just like, when I listen to people talk about politics, I'm just like, people need to understand libertarian concepts, limited government. These are foundational for a free society. Anyway, let's continue on with Mark Ward.
Case, because the formal case that's supposed to be made, if you were trained at PCC in the 90s, for example, the case you were taught, especially late 90s, I've listened to these Del Johnson videos, is that the Textus Receptus is the one true, perfectly preserved text of the New Testament. And as long as you make a faithful, literal translation of that, you're okay. But it sounds like both of these groups have taken some kind of extra step where the King James Version itself is playing a role that, like, according to the formally stated position that it's supposed to be, in the mainstream, as represented by Pensacola back in the late 90s. I don't know if they're in exactly the same place now, but it sounds like they've taken a step beyond that, giving the King James a special role that, like, again, officially it's not supposed to have. So what?
Okay. So if Mark Ward knew his history, he would know that the Bible Society that was started with William Wilberforce and a lot of his friends in 1804, they were to use the Masoretic text, the Textus Receptus, and be guided by the King James Version. So exactly what they're doing in Korea. And so apparently they're King James Onlyist too, and they're overstepping the mark. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. This is what they did for the Bible Societies did for, in some places, 100 years. They were translating from the Textus Receptus, the Masoretic text, and they were using the King James as a guide. And so we can see that they did this with the Dutch Bible, the Statenvertaling Bible. And not saying that it's exactly identical to the King James. There's a few bits here and there that I would definitely update and change. But many of these versions that were done in other languages are TR Bibles. I mean, you can check them out. I've got the Russian Bible here, Russian Parallel Bible, the Synodal translation, and you can go through and check these out. Now, I know one pastor said there was about 117 differences that he wanted to change in the Russian Bible, but it's Mark Ward's against this. He's against it. You know what I mean? We've got the Ukrainian Bible, and so when was this first done? Okay, well, that's just sold by the Trinitarian Bible Society, but a lot of these were done by the Bible Society originally. Like the Cambodian Bible, because I've worked on a Cambodian Bible. The New Testament and Old Testament are complete, and they've done an audio. But there was already a King James Version type of Bible, a TR Bible, basically done in 1954, and the Bible Societies bought the rights to that and just scrapped it. So you can't use it, you can't reprint it because it's under copyright, and they've just scrapped it, sort of thing. So no one can go and print it, and yes, people years and years before, like they were seen as like heroes, like William Carey. A lot of people doing Bible translation work in India, in Pakistan. Like when I said to James White that I was working on an Urdu Bible, he was like, "Oh, great! That's all they need is a version based upon the Textus Receptus." Where 100 years before, people are still revered as like heroes for doing that. You know what I mean? They're the guys you read in Christian history magazines. It's like this guy went in there and translated the Bible into Punjabi, into Urdu, into Arabic, and did all this stuff, and then he died. And it's like, wow, what a hero of the faith. And now it's just like, oh, he's not a critical text guy. Oh, he must be a cultist then. You know what I mean? These guys were our heroes. The reformers. These guys call themselves reformed, yet they hate the Bible that the reform guys use. And they don't like the Bible that was coming out of the early Bible societies. Now, the Bible Society 1831, they had this huge rift in it, and the Trinitarian Bible Society was formed because there were so many Unitarians in the Bible Society. So a whole bunch of Trinitarians said, we're leaving this. Let's start the Trinitarian Bible Society only for Trinitarians. And since then, they've been doing like TR, Masoretic Text, King James type Bibles since then. But even still, the Unitarian Bible Society, I guess you call it, after lots of Trinitarians left, they were still doing a TR edition, Masoretic Text edition, and lining it up with the King James. It was only until after they were like, we're sick of this text, let's get some Unitarians and Westcott and Horton and others, and then they developed a different text that was favorable to Unitarians. Isn't that strange that they did that? And George Naismith wrote a book about that. Why would you think he's lying? He wrote a book about the doctrines that have changed. Anyway, that's another topic.
What are they formally saying in their doctrine of bibliology? Can you discern that?
Yes. So people love simplicity. Anything complicated throws people off easily. And then the way the King James only people in the States approach people is that God doesn't make things complex.
God is not a God of confusion, the author of confusion.
That's right.
Right. I hear that all the time.
So there has to be a simple way for the common believers to access the perfect Bible in one volume.
And to have it in their hands.
So one of the pastors I was very close to in South Korea, he says, if God inspired his word, there has to be a volume or version that is perfect and so accessible to the hands of the lay people. And so the argument is not really complicated. God has to have something perfect because he's perfect.
Right.
And then what? Which Bible? Let's argue. Then the King James Version, of course, has the longest history in the Western Christianity being used as the official Bible.
So they say. The Latin Vulgate actually holds that title, but that's what they think. But
now
right?
That's obsolete. The Latin Vulgate is obsolete, and then it's nobody really reads it anymore. So it's really from a self-centered perspective, the worldview, because we have this access to this language and access to this part of the Virgin. It has to be perfect. The perfection has to be in my hands, on my laps. So that's where it began. And people who are not trained in the history of the Bible and textual criticism, of course, that totally makes sense. God loves us and he wants to reveal himself to us in an intact way. then how can you believe the Bible that misses many verses?
Right.
The verses that has no verse. Actually, in Korean versions, it has actually like a none. In Korean, none. In that verse, none.
Like
And
Acts
then
8:37, 1 John 5.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So they promote the idea, 1 John 5, the
7,
Johanan comma, yeah.
Has been omitted.
And they say, yeah, God wouldn't do that. I mean, He wouldn't give us something.
So Alan Stewart said, "Oh no, simple Christianity. Yeah, it's got to be complicated. We've got to have gurus that tell us what the Word of God is,
That has holes."
Right.
So that's what convinced me at first. And as a young boy, I was in my high school, and my family was introduced to it by my mother first, and then whole family moved to that church, the King James Only Church in Korea. And that made sense. Yes, I mean, God has to preserve. God has to have preserved everything in perfect.
I want to hear that story in a minute, but I want to drill down a little further. When I have heard about these translations from the King James into foreign languages, the other language that I speak, the modern language I speak is Spanish. I'm at maybe 65% fluency. I don't know. I can understand preaching really, really well. Individual conversation is a little more difficult. I've never been able to be immersed. But I remember this example from the Rey Jaime, King James version, translated directly from the King James into Spanish. Now, this has just been told to me. I haven't actually observed this with my own two eyes. I just want to mention that. But I always remember this example. It says in there, at the passage that says, "And they cast the same in his teeth." In other words, the people are insulting Jesus when he's on the cross. It says, "Y echaron lo mismo en sus dientes," which is very literally, "and they cast the same," or the same thing, "in his teeth." And, I don't know idiomatic Spanish incredibly well, but I'm reasonably certain that doesn't mean anything in Spanish. And I think, therefore, that's one of the faults of making a photocopy of a photocopy, that you lose resolution. People are going to misunderstand. I often think Philippians, Paul is still happy to see the gospel preached.
So I'm wondering which version he's actually talking about, because I'm sure that the Gomez version, like talking with Will Kinney, he says, yeah, it's a really good version. D.A. Waite, these guys understand idioms. They understand Hebrew idioms that can come into the Greek as well. And so most of these are translated, they don't just have "God forbid" there, which is an English idiom. People know about these type of things. And so Mark Ward, he doesn't really know the details of this, so he's telling his story. But I'm sure that if, Will Kinney was tagged in this, and other, Spanish-speaking people who know the Bible there, they'd be able to look at that and see what the Spanish people translated that into. Sure, there might have been people over the years who did it wrong, but at the end of the day, most people understand English idioms, and that things are going to be translated from Hebrew and Greek into English in a certain way, and that doesn't necessarily work in every language.
Preached, even of contention, the King James says, well, I'm still happy to see the Bible translated, even if it's a photocopy of a photocopy. I'm sure the Lord can do much good and has done much good through that. But it still isn't right. It still isn't best. I then became aware of these false friends after I learned about "y echaron lo mismo en sus dientes," and I thought, it just has to be that some of these translations that are made from the King James directly into Korean or Spanish, or I have heard of other languages. I'm not sure what they are now. They must be tripped up by some of my false friends. Do you have evidence that these Korean King James versions, any of them, when they translate from the King James, are actually perpetuating mistaken understandings that come through the development of English?
Yes, so the archaic language of the English King James Version, that problem doesn't exist in the Korean King James Version, because the Korean King James versions have more modern Korean than the Korean standard versions.
So it
versions
wasn't
that have used.
It's not like they translated the King James into archaic 400-year-old Korean. They translated it into contemporary Korean. Okay.
That's right. So many late Korean Christians actually struggle with the because it does include some archaic Korean language, just like King James Version has. So it's kind of flipped here.
That's so interesting.
People struggle with the archaic language of the King James Version, but when the Korean Christians are introduced to the Korean King James Version, they actually find it very refreshing because it uses the modern Korean. It helps people to understand it better. Yet, I do understand what you mean by the false friends, and there are some examples that the King James translators, Korean King James translators have used those false.
Okay, so I just did a quick Google search on Matthew 27:44, and so we see what's written here. It doesn't seem like it's mentioning teeth at all here. It says the thieves who have been crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. With him also reviled him. With him also reviled him. With him also scolded him in the same way. With him also insulted him in the same way. So it doesn't look like that this is even an issue that Mark Ward's talking about. So I'd love to hear if people have heard of this, or they can find this Spanish edition that apparently has the teeth concept in it. Yeah, that would be interesting. I'm going to keep searching as these guys are chatting.
False friends.
Okay, I'm all ears. I want to hear this.
Yeah, with the sense of the false friends that you are pointing out, first, unicorn. What is unicorn in the Bible? Unicorn is used, I think, 6 times in the Old Testament, and both Korean translations of the King James Version, the two most popular ones, both have adopted to use the word unicorn. In Korean, unicorn. That's transliteration of unicorn. And when Korean people hear unicorn, they immediately think what Americans people think when they hear the word unicorn.
So be really clear with me, because I don't speak Korean. I can say "not a hango marahe," which is I speak Korean, but it's false. I cannot speak Korean. I want to make sure. So unicorn, it's not just a transliteration that was invented by the Korean King James. This is actually a Korean word, and there are little Korean girls who wear unicorn t-shirts.
Yes,
okay,
that's right. So even Jung, in his the website that explains all the translation issues, he says we have to adopt the word unicorn in the King James Version because it has to be a mysterious horse-like animal that has one horn, and that's what he argues from the context of these verses. It can't be the wild ox. It has to be something else more than a wild ox.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge this is actually, I did mention the unicorn in Authorized, my book, but I've shied away from doing a video on it because I felt like there's some complexities here. I'm a little unclear on what were the King James translators picturing when they chose that word. What I do know is that the Hebrew word Reem, I believe it is, cannot mean a white gauzy creature with a colorful horn sticking out of its face or head or skull, like my little girl used to play with. She had multiple unicorns actually that she liked to play with, all stuffed ones. It doesn't mean that, and I personally don't think that the King James translators could have meant that, or that they did, but I'm not sure. Anyway, by whatever means, the Korean King James versions who perpetuate that, they're not accurately representing what God inspired. What other examples have you run across of false friends tripping up?
Well, it just depends, because some things can be transliterated. we have things transliterated all the time from Greek and from Latin, baptism, bishop from episkopos, lots of things have come over from Greek and Latin, Beelzebub. And so English has influenced so many other languages. And so even my wife, she is fluent in several languages and can read Arabic, and she knows a lot of about language. And so but sometimes if she's speaking Punjabi or she's speaking Urdu or Hindi, or reading something in Arabic, there can be certain English words that just stand out, so and they will use the English term, and it's just become part of their culture to use that English term. So sometimes even I'll be listening to a conversation and it will say a name, Margaret, in a different language, either Punjabi or Urdu, and then it'll say hospital, nurse, and so sometimes I can just follow the amount of English in all that, and then I say, well, you guys are talking about Margaret. She's in hospital and she works as a nurse, and I can sort of like put all the little breadcrumbs together and figure it out, because English has huge influence over the world. And it's only really like cultures like the French culture who were saying, we don't want English, English is overtaking us. But other places like China and, when I was in Pakistan, people want English. They want to learn English. They want to talk it. They want to speak it. And lots of cultures around the world. The Philippines, if you go there and street preach in American English, they understand you. If you speak in Australian, they don't have any idea what you're saying. You sound like an Irishman. You go to places like Cambodia, Singapore, they have Singlish. It's very similar. It's an English mix. India, there's 50 million native English speakers, in a sense, where that's their first language. Papua New Guinea, I street preach all the time there. They understand full Australian English. And so anyway, so having the word unicorn, which a lot of people do feel that the Webster's dictionary is correct with rhinoceros unicornus is the one-horned rhino. That's what's talked about in the Bible. And I think that's a very good definition. And so the Korean people having mentioned this, that there's really nothing wrong with that, because if that's the definition in a lot of not just the English King James, but if you go through and look at other versions in many different languages, they got unicorn there as well. A unicorn just means one horn. And so, yes, some people will think it's a fluffy toy, or what, it's an actual horse running around with a thing. But people who study these things out, and the more that people talk about it, it's like, well, it's an Indian rhinoceros, most probably, or it could be something that's become extinct. But it was a one-horned beast that was very big and very powerful. So there's nothing wrong with transliteration. If it works, if it carries across the meaning for people.
These translators.
Yeah, one of the famous mistranslations in the King James Version is John 14:2. There are many mentions in my Father's house. When we hear the word mention, we think it's a large, luxurious house or castle.
Right.
But actually, not John's translation, but Lee, who is more like Ruckmanite, he intentionally translated mention as large houses in Korean, not dwelling places. So John has adopted.
So aren't you glad that when you go to heaven, you're just going to get a little apartment, just maybe a retirement home? It'll have a little basin, in the toilet there for you to wash your hands, and a tiny little bar fridge, just enough for your daily needs. And it's like, my father's house has many mansions. I know Mark Ward did a whole video on this saying it was a false friend and everything, but clearly there is that aspect of it being something grandiose where it's heaven. Streets are made of gold there. It's like, oh no, we're just going to be paupers up there, and this is the type of argument against it. I'll just go through some of these comments. So Bryan Ross is just saying hi, hoping everyone's well. So I did start to listen to the Dwayne Green podcast today, but apparently he had a flat battery or something, and he couldn't charge. I think it was his laptop or something in time, so he canned it halfway through. But that will be an interesting one to watch. Alan Stewart said, Mark Ward making up something to advance the narrative. Who would have thought? So everyone's just saying hi to everyone else. Alan Stewart, you couldn't tell my daughter that unicorns are real. There are pictographs of unicorns. Maybe it's extinct. I just think it's a rhino. False friendicorn. Yeah, and notice Mark Ward's like, I was going to do a whole thing on it, but I've shied away from it. And I think that's probably due to, I've done quite a bit on that. Even the creation science groups, Answers in Genesis, they did one, and it was pretty much saying, yeah, that's correct. That they were going against the New King James even. And so I was stoked with that. Alan Stewart says, I meant to type, you couldn't tell my daughter that unicorns aren't real. Oh, yeah, that makes more sense. False friendicorn.
The dwelling places, which is closer to the original language, Monet, but the lead.
But it is the context as well, which is in heaven. It's not just, we've got dwelling places here on earth, but if you think that, that's all you're getting in heaven, it's, and I do understand it is, the New Jerusalem, it is sort of more like a place which is a room, but you get your own room in heaven. People are like, oh, in heaven, there's no more pain, no more suffering, no more tears. Streets of gold. They're this grandiose thing. But when it comes to King James Edition, it shouldn't be mansions. It should just be, if you were investing in something, you would want to know if you're getting your hard-earned money in your retirement. Are you getting a condo or an apartment or just a piece of corrugated iron leaned up against the wall that you're going to sleep under? And you want to know. And to me, the translation, in my father's house are many mansions. To me, it's a perfectly fine translation. A mansion is an amazing place. And even Keith Green sort of nailed this. He said, look, if it took God 6 days to create the world here, and he's been working on heaven for 2,000 years, I think it's going to be a little bit better than this place down here. And it just seems strange that it's like, oh, it's just going to be this humble little, it's just a dwelling place, like a little outhouse. It's like, no. It's God has some pretty good things in store for those who love him. Enter into your rest, and here's your little, like a communist style block, just you got your, like living in one of those, Soviet 1970s Soviet apartment blocks that they started building here in Australia and in America. And it's like, no, I think
he has adopted large houses, castles.
Let me jump in here. So I made a video about this, and I would not use the word mistranslation there to apply to the word mansions in the King James. That is an example of, I just want to be clear about that, because if I'm going to criticize the King James, because I do not believe it's perfect, I have one video where I critique one error I believe that is present in Job 17:6, but this wasn't an error. I want to be clear about that. But it is an error for, you had it written down here in the notes that you sent me, Lee's translation to use large houses. That is an error, because that's what the King James word mansions means to us today. That is not what the word mansions meant when the King James translators chose it in 1611. So that's a reasonably clear there's a little wiggle room there because
Yeah,
I mean,
but thank you for pointing that out. I just want to be very precise.
good.
Ooh,
Yeah.
wiggle
Well,
room there.
we're
cannot be-
PhD biblical studies
Yeah.
kind of guys,
That's
and
right. That's right.
we thrive on, I've told people before.
I mean, even Mark Ward's first word, halt, he's like, it doesn't mean to stop, but it actually does. It means one of your legs is stopped. You're limping. And so, yes, it does take it. You have to go in a roundabout way to sort of figure that out, but it still does mean something stopped. Look at the Oxford English Dictionary, look at Webster's, you read other versions, that study to show thyself approved under God. The Spoudazo, modern Greek, look up Spoudazo, it means to study. If you go through Ecclesiastes, it talks about the word study. It talks about having knowledge of books, and then it has about studying. It specifically uses that word to study as an effort of the mind. So when you read, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. The word spoudazo is study because you're rightly dividing the word of truth. You're using your mind. It's not just be diligent. That's the lexical definition. The contextual definition is study. And so this is, half the time Mark ought to bring out a video and people in the comments are just like, well, no, not really, because of this, this, and this. And then I guess he just stews on that for like 5 years. And then these moments come up. He's like, I can't really save it unicorn because I think I'm probably wrong there. And all mansions, I think I'm right, but there's a little bit of wiggle room there. He's not being absolutely exact and saying, yeah, well, this is a problem. Ahena, mansion, noun, Latin mansio, from manio, to dwell, any place of residence, a house or habitation. And so I'll just jump on the etymology.com. Actually, I'll just type in mansion and etymology. Mansion, a chief residence of a lord. From French, mansion, stay, permanent abode, house, habitation, home, mansion, state, situation. From Latin, mansionum, nominative mansio, a staying, a remaining, night quarters, station, noun of action. From past participle stem of manere, to stay, to abide, to remain, in a sense of any large and stately house. From 1510s. Any large or stately house. This is just the etymological dictionary. I mean, the word also was used in Middle English as a stop or stage of a journey, hence probably astrological sense of a temporary home, mansion, a house. And so if we were to go mansion, King James Version. It's hard because usually I just grab a Strong's Concordance and open it up and it's like, well, where do you find that nowadays? I guess Bible Hub. I'll just type in mansion. But anyway, so that would be a whole study in itself. But at the end of the day, basically, mansion, the lexical definition of mansion means a dwelling place. Where is that dwelling place? In heaven. Okay, so it's just going to be a little brick shack, a little apartment, humble little thing, You know, I mean, think of heaven with streets of gold. Maybe your place would be made out of gold. Maybe it would be made out of one big cut diamond or something. Is that going to be a mansion? Like, you've got to have a contextual definition. You got every word that you look at, you got to think, what's the lexical definition and what's the contextual definition? That'll help you.
What was so valuable to me in the years of education I spent was not getting the letters after my name, because, you know, so few people care. In fact, a lot of people are put off by them, as you will discover. Although I gather that Korean culture is a little different than American culture on this score, as far as respect for degrees. But what I found was so valuable was being able to be told I'm wrong over and over and over again by people who were qualified to do so, and given sort of social permission to do so. Because once you're a pastor, it's really awkward. People don't want to correct you unless they themselves are socially awkward. There's no mechanism. You know, you're speaking and you really usually won't get corrected if you say something dumb. But in school, you go to a lot of school and you get people saying, it's not mistranslation. So that's
right. That's right.
Thank you for receiving that graciously.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, so
go ahead.
English is not my first language. You know, I didn't speak English until I was 24. And
that is so remarkable.
I didn't write in English until I was 25. So I love to be corrected. So no offense there.
Anybody who truly is fluent in more than one language and they learned that second or third language as an adult, I have immense respect for, because I will never forget how incredibly difficult it was for me to push and push and push in my mind to get past the hump in Spanish to where I could generate grammatical sentences. And to this day, I mean, you sound like a PhD level guy when you speak English. When I speak Spanish, I sound like the dummiest dummy. Oh, man. So I have great respect. Please don't take that.
Praise God.
Yeah.
Praise God for his grace on my life. Yeah. Being a pastor in Southern area, you know, the Southern Bible Belt. I was in Tennessee, South Carolina, and now I'm in North Carolina. You can't pastor Southern people with a strong accent. So that's why I have worked hard to get rid of.
You've done incredibly well.
The accent as much as possible.
Yeah. Give us another example. I'm all ears.
Yes. So the third one, the last one, is science in 1 Timothy 6:20, and I think this is most obvious intentional mistranslation of the Korean King James versions. So they do know that it doesn't mean science in the Greek text, but because the King James version has adopted the word science, which doesn't mean science in 1611, like we understand this word.
Right.
But they intentionally chose science instead of knowledge. So, you know, gnosis in Greek text. So that's quite interesting to me. But I've heard actually many Korean pastors using this verse saying, don't believe evolution. Right. Don't believe what the scientists say. Just like American King James only pastors do. Right. And I think this very useful verse to refute those scientific data. I guess that's the reason why they chose it. I don't know if they're exactly why they chose it this way, but this is.
So A. Hennis says, dummiest dummy. He's a PhD. Alan Stewart, we Southerners are racist. It does mean science. Science, noun, Latin scienta, from scio, to know. In a general sense, knowledge or certain knowledge, the comprehension or understanding of truths and facts by the mind. So, I mean, the word science, I mean, if we just look at Wiktionary, which is usually pretty good. Middle English science, borrowed from Old French, Latin scienta, knowledge. I mean, science is a knowledge in a certain field. It's pretty much what it is, you know. Science, countable and uncountable plural sciences. Countable, a particular discipline or branch of knowledge that is natural, measurable, or consisting of systematic principles rather than intuition or technical skill from the 14th century. Economics is a messy discipline, too fluid to be a science, too rigorous to be an art. So it's just a type of knowledge that is, you know, when we say, oh, he's got that down to a science, it can also be a technical skill. I guess that's probably uncountable. So specifically natural sciences, my favorite subject at school was science, mathematics, and history. 3, knowledge is gained through study or practice, mastery in a particular discipline in an area. So they're saying this is archaic. If we conceive God's sight or science before creation, the King James Bible, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, and avoid vain and profane babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. Grace be with thee. Amen. So it's saying now only in theology, okay, that type of thing is used. But I would say, say the science of textual criticism, and even if I was to talk about just the theories behind textual criticism, that's a type of science. Everything can be a type of science. You know, I'm sure there's a certain science behind the way that Erasmus used his Latin and Greek knowledge, and there's a certain science behind linguistics. There's a certain science behind everything, which just means it's knowledge in a higher sort of way. The King James translators could have easily used knowledge, opposition of knowledge, falsely so called, but they did use the word science. And so to me, that would just have to be looked at in its, let's look at Oxford English Dictionary. But what I find is with the modern Oxford English Dictionary, oftentimes I see guys going to this where it actually doesn't have all the same information that was formerly used in the one on archive. So if I go to archive, Oxford Dictionary, Internet Archive, go volume 1. It should come up with S, usually down the bottom. S. We'll go one page view. So Alan Stewart said, evolution, now okay. A. Hannah, but as noted, it is knowledge, understanding based on truth and facts. A. Hannah, so no, evolution is not based on truth or facts. Derek McClure says, science in etymology online dictionary mentions knowledge 6 or 7 times in the first paragraph description. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, well, they're making out it doesn't mean this anymore. And it's like, okay, so we're at SA here. So let's go down to, say, here. It might be SC. And we'll just read through some of the Oxford. A. Hannah, well, the textual critics followed Darwin, so it is possible to see how they would accept Darwin. Anyway, so this is loading up. It's taking a little bit long, but what I might do, I might just jump out of these other other ones here. See many in use. Then you have to pay money. Sorry, OED, I'll get that for free. And I'll do it on the side while I'm letting these guys chat. So I'll probably get to maybe about halfway with these guys, and it's nearly midnight here, so I'm going to have to pack it up because I'm going to be busy in the morning, up early, probably 5 o'clock or something like that. So want to get some sleep.
They did know what the Greek said, and they stuck with what they felt the King James said, which is itself a problem. Or they were just translating directly from the King James without reference to the Greek there. And then they're tripped up by a false friend. They don't realize. I mean, it is so convenient to talk about science falsely so-called. It preaches really well.
Well, I mean, D.A. Waite was very clear when he talked about definitions. He would say, yeah, science falsely so-called. And he would say what the Greek word is, what the Greek word meant. He would read, oftentimes read Thayer's. He would read other lexicons, concordances. And so it's, Mark was just saying, these people they don't really know. What I've found is Mark Ward comes along and he goes, you realize it doesn't mean science. And people are like, no, it actually does, because they've done the homework and they've studied it already way before Mark Ward came along. Half of these guys did it before Mark Ward was alive. And then he's just like, well, these people, they're just copying it over, not even thinking that the word, they're thinking that the word means, evolution or something like that, and it's like, no, Mark, people do understand these. I remember in 2004, I think it was 2003, I did a study into Spadauzzo, and I was a New King James guy, and I went, this is the superior reading, because my pastor gave us all separate verses to all the men in the church, and we were all to memorize it and to write a one-page summary of it, of the verse. And so I went through it and went, oh, well, the New King James that I'm reading says be diligent. But then one of my arguments in there was actually to study is way more superior. It's a better reading because it is the diligence of the mind, which is what study means. So it's study to shew thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. How do you do that? You use your brains, you use your mind. So it's a study. And so anyway, I've actually come up with Saya is an Arabic word. Wow, very interesting. I'm just looking at my last name here. It's got Saya. Okay, so anyway, let's let Mark continue.
That is not what the King James translators meant by that word in 1611, and it's not what Paul meant. So at those places, these poor Korean Christians are not getting what the Holy Spirit inspired in Paul. And, that's the real problem here. God's people reading something that God didn't say. The message has been garbled. Praise the Lord that the garbling of that message still allows the gospel to come through. And let me ask then, do you regard most of these Korean King James only groups?
Yes. So the Lee's group has been, like I said, has been condemned by the major denominations in South Korea, and the way they treat other Christians really tells me that they have serious issues in their spirituality.
Yeah.
They do preach the gospel. They do preach the blood of Christ that covers the sins of the world. And I do believe there are Christians in the group as well. But the demeanors of these pastors and preachers in that group are very concerning. I mean, I feel like I cannot be friends with them, even as a pastor.
Yeah.
So there's a real issue there. And on the other side, the Pastor Chung's group, he has changed over time. So when he first introduced the King James Version to South Korea, he was quite more militant. So he uses the, expression like the devil has contaminated the Korean versions, modern versions. But nowadays, he doesn't use it anymore, especially he's being loved by the many denominational Christians who watch him on YouTube. So now he doesn't use that kind of phrase anymore. But his core teaching hasn't changed, though. And also, there are people I know that I love. There are people who go to that church still, his church, and I know they're Christians. So I believe, Pastor Chung is a true Christian, but he is misinformed and willingly ignorant of what's going on.
Yeah.
And the degree that he got from PCC is just a 1-year Bible master's, like a master of ministry, something like that. And he wasn't really getting the training that he needed to get, because he is a very smart man. He's a scientist. He's an engineering professor at a university in my city, Incheon, South Korea. And he has done a great work as a researcher. So he's very smart. But his theological education is quite limited. As a PhD student who is reading the New Testament Greek every morning, waking up, doing devotion. And I still feel like, my knowledge of Greek is so limited.
Right.
I know there's just a large room to grow. But, he hasn't really gotten the education that he needed to get. So he's quite ignorant of many issues that he needs to be aware of.
Yeah, this brings up a theme on my channel and a theme in my life where I don't want my work pushing back against King James Onlyism to boil down to or amount to educated people mocking uneducated people.
See what I mean? The concepts. I mean, say someone like D.A. Waite, who it's his funeral today. Obviously, he's passed away. Like he would run rings around all of these guys. Like when I listened to D.A. Waite's material, which I've probably listened to, no word of his exaggeration, maybe 500 of his sermons, usually talking about the Bible issues, and sometimes other issues, but most of the time I would just listen to Dean Burgon stuff, and when he's talking about New King James or when he's talking about other versions or other issues, and Mark Ward puts himself on this pedestal like he's some sort of savant. He's like Rain Man going around and doing what he's doing, and it's like D.A. Waite would just run rings around someone like Mark Ward. And like someone like Kirk DeVitra, Phil Strand, most of these guys have a way better education than Mark Ward has. And that's why we get frustrated a lot of the time with Mark Ward, because we've done studies into some of these words like unicorn and Easter and things that have been contended with over the years. And we've come to some really logical conclusions on this. And oftentimes I feel that he hasn't done those, the hard yards on those. He's just listened to some King James guys talk about it and gone, "Oh, they're correct there. I better not bring that up." And oftentimes when he brings something up, it's like we're all looking at each other going, doesn't he realize, maybe he should do a 5-minute Google search on that word and get, just figure it out. And so, for Mark Ward to put himself on a pedestal and sort of say, he's like, I don't want it to be like my whole channel to be, educated people looking down on uneducated people. At the end of the day, Mark Ward has a lot of errors in his material. People like Taylor DeSoto have just gone through Mark Ward like someone swallowed some Epsom salts and has just gone through them. It's like he just went through Mark Ward's stuff like a hot knife through butter, and he's just torn apart a lot of his argumentation, showing, that basically Mark Ward doesn't know that much. I think I've torn apart a lot of his concepts, especially dealing with textual criticism and the rest of it, and his KJV Parallel Bible and the Textual Confidence Collective. And I look at all that and I just think it's just a lot of it's like kindergarten. I mean, he's getting some educated people on his channel, but it's like when it comes to Mark himself, oftentimes he's contradicting what they're saying. He's getting majority text guys who believe in the last 12 verses of Mark, who believe in the Pericope Adulterae, that they should be in there. And he's Mark saying, we should, all Bibles are sort of saying the same thing, but we got these guys on the channel who are saying that they're not saying the same thing, but we're sort of in agreement against King James Onlyism, and you guys are Ruckmanites, and it's just it's pseudo scholarship. You don't have to be a genius to figure out that these guys are pseudo scholars, and I just think that I think Ruckman was way smarter than Mark Ward. I think Gail Ripley is way smarter than Mark Ward. It was amazing. Like, I don't have that much, good to say about, Gail Ripley, unfortunately. But I actually said to a guy once, I said, James White's book is worse than Gail Riplinger's book. There are more errors in James White's book than Gail Riplinger's book. And he lost it. And I said, well, we can sit down and do a comparison. We'll go page by page and we'll work out how many errors are on James. Because just going through his Revelation 16:5 thing, I found dozens of just errors, factual. It got to the point where it's like he doesn't know anything about this, but he's written 5 pages on the topic. Didn't know there was Nomina Sacra there. Had no idea about the name of Jehovah and all the rest of it. And he was just, it's a conjectural limitation. It's not a conjectural limitation. Everything he said was wrong, pretty much. And so, but if you go all through James White's material, everything that he's saying is pretty much wrong. And yes, there are some things where he's naming a manuscript and saying, well, it's, this old, or it was written by this person. It's like, well, okay, got that right. but his argumentation is flawed. And at least Ricklinger she got a lot of things wrong, but she got some things right. So anyway, I just, this whole concept of Mark Ward being part of the highbrow society, looking down on us poor. And the thing is, what I've discovered, the whole modern version defense is coming from the top down. It's coming from the academy, people in universities, people like Metzger, people like Kurt Aland, people like Bart Ehrman, people who are highly educated in the field of textual criticism. They're coming along saying the new RSV or the NIV, that these are all good. Okay, so usually you get people who can step up to the plate on their level and say, no, we think that King James, we look at Edward Hills, look at D.A. Waite, look at people like, what's his name, the Australian guy, Gavin McGrath. If you don't know who Gavin McGrath is, you need to know. Scott Jones. There are many people who can stand up against these people and have very strong intellectual argumentation against them. But the vast majority of people who are saying, hey, no, we don't want that in our Bibles, in our church, are lay people. So what they do is they're actually looking down just on the general church, because of course the general church is going to be filled with lay people. And lay people are like, hey, no, I actually want 1 John 5:7 in my Bible. Actually, I think that reading's better. And they mightn't be able to articulate it in the best way. So Mark Ward is looking at those people going, look, this stupid idiot is articulating it this way. And people sometimes they make mistakes. They don't really know the languages that well. But there are other people who do know how to argue these things. And so we wouldn't just look at, a church that only uses the NIV. I wouldn't just go up to anyone in that church and say, hey, Grandma, what do you think about this reading? And if she said something wrong, I'm like, oh, you people are stupid. You critical text people you don't even know what you're talking about. You wouldn't do that, would you? But that's what these guys do, because a lot of people want to still read the King James. They have the right motivation. They have the right answer. But to get to that answer, sometimes they're saying the wrong thing because they don't know how to get there. But there are people who have answered, I think, thoroughly answered Metzger. I mean, you read Metzger, it's just filled with doubt. No wonder Bart Ehrman's in a land of confusion because Metzger drove him there. He drove him there and dropped him off there and said, here you go, fend for yourself. And he's just an absolute mess nowadays, just the rubbish that's coming out of his mouth. But anyway, yeah, the whole highbrow thing is pretty ridiculous.
That is arrogant sin. I never want to.
Yeah, and so he's saying, I never want to be like that. But hasn't his whole ministry been like that? Now, I got copyright flagged for showing him, showing the clip of the Wormwoods, who were just drinking and saying we don't need education and all this, and we don't want Matilda to be educated, and it was Danny DeVito and he's likening himself to a teacher who's just trying to bring across a message, but these illiterate people who don't even know a single letter of Greek or Hebrew, they're on his channel, challenging him and all this. And it's like, so he's constantly putting himself above us, even though one side of his mouth is saying, oh, that's a sin and I shouldn't do it, but then he does it. On one side of his mouth, people like David Cloud, people like D.A. Waite, people who know these languages, many times they're just as well educated as the opposition, sometimes more. These guys need to be listened to. And so, anyway, let's continue.
Forget the good gifts that God has given all around the church to the educated and the uneducated.
But he's not saying King James people are educated, is he? He's saying I just can't point out the fact that we're the smart guys, they're the dumb guys. I don't want to just be known as I'm just browbeating these dumb guys. It's like, no, seriously, Mike. There are people who know so many languages, who are way more educated than you will ever be in Greek and Hebrew. And this is the thing. I'd love to have Mark Ward come on my program. I'll ask him. I'll have a chat to him and bring out how much Hebrew does he know? How much Greek does he actually know? And I understand you can be, linguistically fluent in a language, or you can, have a type of fluency in just looking at books and reading books, and you might be able to speak the language. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of King James guys who know Greek. There's people in this chat who I would say know 100 times more Greek than you. It's just in this chat alone. And so I'm just like, what are you saying, Mark? You have to really prove yourself that you are this educated. Anyway.
My answer to this problem of, well, then what do you do when people who really genuinely may not have been called to learn Greek or Hebrew, they stumble into mistakes. They don't realize that what they're saying just isn't accurate, and they can't really even conceive of it because they've never studied Greek or Hebrew. How do you handle those problems? My answer is to both sides clothe yourselves with humility. So you go back to Korea if the Lord has you do that, and you clothe your PhD with humility, and you serve those people until they trust you. And then on the flip side, a man like that, and countless pastors in the U.S. who have many other gifts, but did not, let's say, get any training or good training or much training in Greek or Hebrew. Often they'll get a little Greek in King James Onlyism, but they won't get any Hebrew. and they get only enough Greek to be dangerous, they really do not realize how much they don't know. If they themselves would clothe themselves with
I've got to rewind that. Listen to this. This is what he's saying, and I mean, you know, it makes me mad that he's actually saying this.
if the Lord has you do that, and you clothe your PhD with humility, and you serve those people until they trust you, and then on the flip side, a man like that, and countless pastors in the U.S. who have many other gifts, but did not, let's say, get any training or good training or much training in Greek or Hebrew. Often they'll get a little Greek in King James Onlyism, but they won't get any Hebrew, and they get only enough Greek to be dangerous. They really do not realize how much they don't know. If they themselves would clothe themselves with humility and just acknowledge there must be more to this that I don't understand. I do see that. There are humble Christians within King James Only circles.
So you've got to be a humble Christian and be lowly. You know what I mean? Humility is a correct evaluation of who you are. Like someone like Gavin McGrath, I don't know anyone who's has studied like he has. He's brilliant in what he does. Someone like Scott Jones, even him, he had collated B and Aleph by the year like 2000. He collated, like his Mark Ward, collated Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, and these aren't even his documents. He's collating them to see where there's mistakes in them. I mean, I just, you know, if he sat next to Mark Ward would be an intellectual pygmy. You know, and I'm only just saying this because Mark Ward is making out that he's on this level, and I'm just like, man, like seriously. You know, I've read your authorized book. It's nice, but it's not really, you know, it doesn't tickle my intellectual fancy. It's, you know, there are people out there who do a lot of work in the area of definitions, etymology, writing dictionaries, talking about idioms, and you know, I don't think Mark Ward is up there with them. He seems to think that he's right up there with them, like people like David Crystal, and he's just not. And anyway, and I think the thing is, like we've seen this with, who was that guy, Barzon, I think it was, who did that book about the translators to the reader, the forgotten preface. So I read through that and just went, this is a nothing. There's just really nothing that's been said. It's just like this false premise that the King James people don't know about this preface, the forgotten preface. And it's like, well, they should read the New King James. And it's like, well, what about all the places where the New King James has like sometimes the opposite reading, or has, you know, instead of a unicorn, it has a wild ox. It's got two horns. You know, it causes a contradiction in the Bible. And it's like, there's plenty of places where I'm often pointing out these problems. And the book isn't really well read. Sorry, it's not well written. The book isn't really intellectual. The book doesn't really, it's not really confronting a real issue that people have just forgotten that there was a preface there. Sure, maybe a few lay people here and there, but most King James people have read the preface. You know, I've read that preface. I remember I used to listen to the preface every day, and I went through a long period of time listening every day. I just had it like it was like LibriVox or something like that, over and over and over and over and over, constantly listening to the preface. And it's the forgotten preface. Anytime I talk about it, like say with people who understand it, Bryan Ross, Christopher Yetzer, Will Kinney, author of the KJV-Today.net site, they know what I'm talking about. Most people know. It's not forgotten. So what I'm trying to point out here is he's become popular for writing this book in critical text circles. So it's almost like if you just write something against King James Onlyism, you will become popular. that all the friends around you will just hold you up and say, you're brilliant. It's not, they're not even really looking at the content. And that's what I thought with Mark Ward when he brought out Authorized. I'm like, oh, here comes another one, but he's sort of stuck with it and plowed through all these things over and over and gone through all these videos, pointing out places where it's like, anyone could have just looked up, D.A. Waite's book, or, the Defying King James, or the Trinitarian Bible Society archaic word list, or Vance's, archaic word list. There's heaps of them. All you have to do is just go through them. And we all know that, the word gay clothing in James doesn't mean, you're going past the pub late at night and they're out there dancing, smoking a cigarette. And it's like, it means that, you know what I mean? We know that. And he's coming along like he's the guru with all this hidden knowledge that he's showing us. Now, I'm all for studying words. I love studying words, love it. But at the end of the day, some of the words that Mark Ward's brought out are simply there. This has been answered many times. Just because some people got it wrong in certain places, it doesn't mean that Mark Ward is the guru of language. He's the Rain Man that we've all got to listen to. He's the savant who just has figured it all out, and we need to listen to him. That most of the time when I do a video on Mark Ward, I'm just exposing how silly it is, and I'm just a layman. I'm not highly educated. I speak roughly, but I can figure out what the Bible's saying. I can figure out certain logical things. I can read the preface for myself and know what the King James guys are saying. Anyway. I guess it just makes me mad, because I do know so many people who are way more educated than I am, know so much about words, people who are polyglots, people who know the original languages, and Mark Ward is just like, waving his hand and just sort of saying, I'm better than that. Our side are way better. I mean, just look at Eugene Nider. I remember I used to have Logos Bible software, and it had Eugene Nider's definitions. They were so bad that I would just cringe. I'm like, who wrote this? This is disgusting. He needs to go through some of the modern versions and see how they're translated, because he's constantly picking on the King James. Why doesn't he go through the NIV or the ESV and look at some of the silly things that are in there? The New King James. Look up Wahab in Supra. Look that up. It's insane how that's translated in the New King James, but it's a viable translation. Why doesn't he talk about that? Why doesn't he just do an honest video and say, well, I can understand why King James guys don't want to go with the New King James, because they changed this word, this word, this word, this word, cause a contradiction here. Hebrews 3:16 have no one going into the promised land, but the King James has some going in, Joshua and Caleb. But he's not doing that. It's like he's got an agenda. He's not really dealing with all the facts, is he?
And I'm thinking maybe you were one of them, because now I want to hear your story. In fact, as I recall, I only heard little snippets of this from you back when I first met you, and it was all very fresh. Now, with the advance of a whole decade, you got to be in your 30s now, right, Joseph?
I'm in my late 30s. I'm 39.
Oh my. Okay.
Yes,
I thought I was
close to 40.
I thought I was even older than you than that, but maybe I would have met you even longer ago than 10 years ago. I've been here 8.5 years in Washington. Anyway, with the advance of years and of education, giving you more hindsight and wisdom and probably graciousness, let's just hear your story. How did you end up at a King James only college in Tennessee, coming from Korea? And then how did you end up leaving there and leaving King James Onlyism and going, actually, I mean, you landed right in one of the major ministries that was pushing back against King James Onlyism. And actually, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this right now. Our pastor, Mark Minnick, at the time, I still love him dearly, and I think of him all the time, and I reference him all the time. He he actually asked people in our church to consider pushing back actively against King James Onlyism. He didn't give specifics, but I appear to be the one person who was, really listening at that time. I think that was before you even came. That was many years ago.
That's right.
That's right. So how in the world did you go on that path from Korean King James Onlyism to a King James Only institution in America to that church?
Yeah, this is a long story, but I'm going to make it as short as possible.
Okay, so over the halfway mark now, so this is obviously going to be a two-part video. So we've got Sundry Thoughts. It says that church I just posted is bilingual English and Korean. Okay. It uses the King James Version and the Korean King James Version. And that's from Keep Bible. Looks like it was deleted, but I posted the church website. I'm not sure where you're posting that, whether that's on YouTube. I'm not deleting anything, and so maybe it's some sort of algorithm or something like that. But Alan Stewart says, Mark Ward not wanting to mock uneducated people. Yeah, it's like it's so toxic. It's so passive aggressive. It's like, I really don't want to mock those who have, disabilities. Sort of it's like he's looking down on us like we're from, the scene of deliverance. We're playing the banjo on the porch, and he's the intellectual guy. We're from the South. He's from the North, and he just has this, I remember reading through it was like the Nazi diary or something. There's a diary of a guy who went from Berlin through to the Soviet Union, was fighting against the Soviets. And all along the way, they were going into villages, and sometimes they were massacring people, sometimes they were friendly to them, and it was always judging them according to, well, these people had a culture like the Germans because they were half-breed Germans, sort of thing. So we allowed them to live, sort of thing. But these other horrible people, they were so backwards. They were like the Russians and Slavs, and so they weren't even fit to live. And it's sort of like this elitism, you know what I mean? Like we're the elite, we're the master race, sort of thing. We're the masters of academia. No one can ever even come close to us. I mean, I acknowledge that there are Jehovah's Witnesses out there who know and understand Greek, understand Hebrew. Like some of these people are very, very intelligent. Some people who win Bible reading contests, Bible memorization contests. I remember there was one guy, a 7-day Adventist, trying to convert me, and he used to say that the guy who won some sort of Bible reading contest in the United States, Bible memorization contest in the United States, was a 7-day Adventist. In other words, see, we've memorized the Bible, we know our stuff. And Stephen Anderson, he often does videos of him, with a whole chapter that he's memorized. And I'm just thinking, I wish you'd just live that chapter. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. And oftentimes it's so you can be looking down on someone. And I remember this 7-day Adventist guy. He asked me about my eschatology one day, and I told him. I said, so what do you think about that? And he said, I just feel very sorry for you, Nick. I feel very, very sorry for you. And he was a very wealthy guy. And he was saying, you could have a life like mine. You could have a beautiful family like this. If you become a 7-day Adventist, your life will change. We would organize a wife for you and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, get lost. You're in a cult. You follow Ellen White. So this is in my mind. I'm not saying it because I'm working for the guy. I worked for him for many years. And but anyway, just this whole elitism thing. It's like, get real. There are people, like I'm sure that Ruckman was very, very intelligent. People say that he knew the original languages. He knew quite a lot of stuff. But I don't agree with his conclusions. But it's like, anyway. and you can sort of sense my frustration with that. I'm just like, how can he say out of one side of his mouth that he doesn't want to commit this sin of looking down on people when he's doing that exact thing? It's like, I can't even describe it. It's just so blatantly hypocritical and disingenuous. What's the real motivation of these people? Well, to get you off the King James and onto Faith Life and Logos Bible software, where you can download their ESV apocryphal edition. A. Hannah says, well, a J. Peeler, pride and money. Yeah. A. Hannah, the humility clothing speech is freaking ridiculous. Yes, absolutely. It does my head in. And usually you can tell when I'm trying to describe something, I'm just going around in circles. It's like, I'm amazed. It's like I've just watched some really, really good fireworks and I can't describe it. I'm like, I'm amazed. J. Peeler, we don't know Greek and Hebrew, so we can't support the King James Version. Yeah. All this is only one-sided, of course. J. Peeler, clothe yourself with humility. You don't understand Hebrew. A. Hannah, it only applies to someone who thinks they have a pure Bible. Yeah, if you go, well, I don't really know the languages that well, but I read an NIV. They're like, good on you, man. Praise the Lord. But if you're like, I have a King James Version, I don't really know Greek and Hebrew. It's like, well, you're an uneducated dimwit. You know what I mean? J. Peeler. Okay, thank you. I'm new to needing to clothe myself with humility because I think we have a pure Bible. Well, the thing is, humility is a correct understanding of who you are. And so that's what Mark Ward needs, is humility. He needs a correct understanding of who he is. He's constantly has this false humility, like the whole thing about being charitable with everyone and all this sort of stuff. It's a false humility. He just needs to understand that there are people on the Textus Receptus side who would just run rings around him. You know what I mean? I know them. I talk to them personally daily, and I'm like, these guys are brilliant. They've got so much good stuff to say, and then I listen to Mark Ward. I'm like, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. Sundry thoughts. YouTube auto hides links, unfortunately. Okay. So, so Docky's just saying that to Sundry Thoughts. So Sundry Thoughts might have thought that I was deleting them. J. Peeler, how could I access that collation that Scott Jones did? Well, I actually contacted Scott. I used to talk to him back in like 2003, 2004. And I said, so what was involved in the collation of those manuscripts? And I actually really didn't know what was involved in collation at the time. So I said, can you explain collation to me? And he never really answered that. So some things he answered. I was like, so do you think there should be a King James Version update? And he was like, no, I don't think there should be. And then I'm like, so what was involved with a collation of B and Aleph? And it was just like silence. So it was like, okay. But other people had, good conversations with him. I just wasn't on a level where I really understood fully what he was saying at the time. But looking back now, I understand he knew so much. I still go through his website and get a lot of really good understanding. I really do hate to harp on this alarming point, but why are most of these anti-New Testament TR males so exceedingly feminine? I understand masculinity is a scale, but what's going on here? Yeah, and a lot of people point that out, and I think I've even sort of said, I think, some people do have that type of thing. So when you say, hey, it's you are talking, in a feminine type of way, that can cause them to go, hey, I'm a victim here. You're the bully. I'm the victim. You're saying that I'm like this when I'm not. And so, but at the end of the day, I know people who talk like Mark Ward, and they are King James people, TR people. And so I don't usually go there with that type of argumentation, but, you know, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Sundry Thought says, oh, okay, Emmanuel Baptist Church in Yeonggu, South Korea is the church. I was there for 2 years. The Korean King James Version is quite good, okay. ebc.org.kr. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I showed those. Yeah, anyway. Oh, that's Emmanuel Baptist Church here. Judaism trans community has been through Hollywood and government, Big Mike, and maybe they moved into counter New Testament realm now. Well, it has been interesting listening to Phil Stringer when he was talking about Virginia Mollenkott in the interview that I did, because we sort of cut it short, but I really wanted to get into how Virginia Mollenkott said that she was molested as a child, and she said that that molestation was a positive thing in her life because it caused her to be the person that she was. She became a lesbian, and then she became sort of like, I think it's like non-binary or something like that, or transsexual or something. And so, but she said, yes, it was thanks to her school teacher who had molested her when she was like very young. And so it's quite incredible that someone who's a consultant on the NIV translation will be saying that it's a positive thing. So very strange. And I think the whole thing of gender inclusive translations, so gender Bible translation, okay, there is I'll just type in a few more words, male, female. There is an article on I think it's bibleversions.com or something like that. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time looking for that, but there's quite a lot written by their Answers in Genesis. Creation Ministries talk about it. But there was in the 1980s a list of places where people were saying Bible should follow this list, and it was gender neutral. Now I got sent that list, and that's what I'm looking for now. Bible Researcher, just found it. How good's that? Okay. So this is the Bible and gender inclusive language. So look at this, 1995. Okay. Okay, equality of male and female. So yes, we can see that. But male authority rooted in creation or the fall. And it's talking about, perhaps the whole patriarchy thing is something to do with the fall of man and all this sort of stuff. So I would recommend people read this article, because to me, this is the seedbed for everything we're seeing in our culture today. Because once the church loses the whole concept of a male and a female, the society is going to follow suit. So, and also seeing people like Jennifer Knust, she's headed up the New Revised Standard Version Readers Edition just recently, and she is an advocate for the LBGT community. And I understand too, like in the King James, it talks about, talking about females, wearing, let it not be the hidden let it not be gold and jewelry and all this sort of stuff, but let it be the hidden man of the heart. So obviously, the anthropos there is dealing with the hidden person of the heart. So for that to be translated as the person of the heart, I'm fine with that type of thing. But definitely, it was pointed out, I think, by Jeff Riddle about the gender inclusive concepts that, if a person die for his friends, and I was sort of toying with that type of thing for a while, and it's like, I'm so glad that I got away from that and have in the King James Version 2023 edition the man, because it's dealing with Jesus dying. It's not just a person, male or female. So anyway, I'll put that link there so everyone can check that out. What else we got there? I think this guy probably is a woman, like old Wolfie White. I hate to imagine such a heinous scene, but I can see White in a dress, 100% woman, just saying. Nothing against women. I love my wife dearly. I'm done. Sorry for that. I know it's a horrible idea. Yeah, it's... But anyway, we'll continue through this another time, probably soon. And I did eventually find the old Oxford English Dictionary for science, and there's quite a lot here. Now I'll just quickly go through and see if it says authorized version. Okay, so looking for the dates of like around 1611, obsolete. Okay. Dun, dun, dun. 3. Still just looking for where it says science falsely so called. It should have it in here. It's quite a popular verse. Sometimes I showed the 1769 edition for some reason. Okay. Logic. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I don't think it has the authorized version there. Actually, Romans. No, that's Gesta Rome. It's just not Romans. I'm sure there are Bible verses in there. Usually they do have it. But anyway, that's for another time. I'm pretty sure I've already done this study into science falsely so-called. It might even be on my website. Sometimes I do all these studies. I think, oh, I'll copy and paste that on my website, and I've already done that at some time. So yeah, even like a Wikipedia article, sometimes it's just good to go to the etymology section. The word science has been used in Middle English since the 14th century in the sense of a state of knowing. The word was borrowed from Anglo-Norman language as the suffix science, which was borrowed from the Latin word scientia, meaning knowledge, awareness, or understanding. It is a noun derivative of the Latin sciens, which is meaning knowing, and undisputably derived from the Latin scio, with the present participle sciere, meaning to know. So it's just knowing. And then they're like, no, it means knowledge. It's like, yeah. Goes in the Proto-Indo-European. We don't really have to go there. In the past, science was a synonym for knowledge or study. In keeping with its Latin origin, a person who conducted scientific research was called a natural philosopher or a man of science. In 1834, William Wellhall introduced the term scientist in a review of Mary Somerville's book on the connection of the physical senses, crediting it to some ingenious gentleman, probably himself. So, yeah. Anyway, I think you guys get the drift. Smith W says, I love etymology. Now science is a synonym for propaganda. Yes. You better believe the science. Trust the scientists. Don't think. Let them do the thinking for you. If you do your own research, you're an idiot. Don't think. Trust them. Yes, they're untrustworthy, but this time, trust them. Anyway, I'm just having a bit of fun there. God bless you guys. We'll see you another time, and we'll continue this. And I've got so many other videos that I want to go through. We've still got our 1 John 5:7 debate video that we've been going through. I'm interviewing Kirk DeVitro. So that's going to be Friday afternoon, Eastern Standard Time at 3 o'clock. And so join us for that. I'm still got the Sinaiticus debate between Chris Pinto and James White that I'm going through. I was thinking about actually doing that tonight, but I thought, no, I really need to get up to speed with that and re-listen to some of those videos. So that won't be for a while. So anyway, I'll just read these comments. Cal, it might be the part of prudence to give up our liberty to use generic masculines in order to remove an obstacle to communication. Cal, not you too. Don't give them any ground, saints, none. Smith WQ, trust the plan and cover your face because it's Islam in the Quran. Trust the plan. Rainbow, have a good one, Nick. Christ is king. Don't worry. I know Trump is a deceiver. Okay, well, God bless you guys, and we'll see you again soon.